Chapter 24 of The Motor Maid. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Motor Maid by Charles Norris Williamson and Alice Muriel Williamson. Chapter 24. There was a telegram from Bertie at Milor. The invitation to the chateau where he was stopping near Clermont-Ferrand had been asked for and given. I heard all about it, of course, from the conversation between the bride and groom, for Lady Turnour prides herself on discussing things in my presence as if I were deaf or a piece of furniture. She has the idea that this trick is a habit of the smart set, and she would allow herself to be tarred and feathered in directoire style if she could not be smart at smaller cost. Nothing was ever more opportune than that telegram, for her ladyship had burnt her frock and chilled her liver in the boat, and though the hotel at Milor was good, she arrived there with the evident intention of making life a burden to Sir Samuel. The news from Bertie changed all that, however, and though the weather was like the breath of icebergs next morning, Lady Turnour was warmed from within. She chatted pleasantly with Sir Samuel about the big luggage which had gone on to Clermont-Ferrand, and asked his advice concerning the becomingness of various dresses. The one unpleasant thing she allowed herself to say was that certainly Bertie wasn't doing this for nothing, and that his stepfather might take her word for it, Bertie would be neither slow nor shy in naming his reward. But Sir Samuel only grinned, and appeared rather amused than otherwise at the shrewdness of his wife's insight into the young man's character. I was conscious that my jacket hadn't been made for motoring when I came out into the sharp morning air and took my place in the Aigle. I was inclined to envy my mistress her fur rugs, but to my surprise I saw lying on my seat a Scotch plaid, platter than any plaid ever made in Scotland. "Does that belong to the hotel?" I asked the chauffeur as he got into the car. "It belongs to you," said he. "A present from Milor for a good child." "Oh, you mustn't!" I exclaimed. "But I have," he returned calmly. "I'm not going to watch you slowly freezing to death by my side, for it won't be exactly summer today. Let me tuck you in prettily." I groaned while I obeyed. "I've been an expense to you all the way, because you wouldn't abandon me to the lions, even in the most expensive hotels, where I knew you wouldn't have stayed if it hadn't been for me. And now this! It only cost a few francs." He tried to reassure me. "We'll sell it again, afterward, if that will make you happier. But sufficient for the day is the rug thereof. At least, I hope it will be. And don't flaunt it, for if her ladyship sees there's an extra rug of any sort on board, she'll be clamouring for it by and by." Northward we started, in the teeth of the wind, which made mine chatter until I began to tingle with a rush of ozone, which always goes to my head like champagne. Our road was a mere white thread winding loosely through a sinuous valley, and pulled taut as it rose nearer and nearer to the cold high level of l'Ecosse, the roof of that gnome-land where we had journeyed together yesterday. From snow-covered billows, which should have been sprayed with mountain wildflowers by now, a fierce blast pounced down on us like a swooping bird of prey. We felt the swift whir of its wings, which almost took our breath away and made the Aigle quiver. But like a bull that meets its enemy with lowered horns, the brave car's bonnet seemed to defy the wind and face it squarely. We swept on toward the snow reaches whence the wind torrent came. Soon we were on the flat plateau of the Cosse, where last year's faded grass was frosted white, and a torn winding sheet wrapped the limbs of a dead world. There was no beauty in this death, save the wild beauty of desolation, and a grandeur inseparable from heights. Before us grouped the mountains of Auvergne, hoary-headed, and looking down we could see the twistings of the road we had travelled, whirling away and away, like the blown tail of a kite trailed over mountain and foothill. "The people at Milor told me I should get up to Saint-Flour all right, in spite of the fall of snow," said the chauffeur, his eyes on the great white waves that piled themselves against a blue-white sky. "But I begin to think there's trouble before us, and I don't know whether I ought to have persisted in bringing you." "Persisted?" I echoed, defending him against himself. Why, do you suppose wild horses would have dragged Lady Turnour in any other direction, now that she is actually invited to be the guest of a marquis in a real-life castle? A rail train could very well have dragged her in the same direction and got her to the castle as soon, if not a good deal sooner than she is likely to get in this car if we have to fight snow. I proposed this way originally because I wanted you to see the gorge of the Tarn, and because I thought that you'd like Clermont-Ferrand and the road there. It was to be your adventure, you know, and I shall feel a brute if I let you in for a worse one than I bargained for. Even this morning it wasn't too late. I could have hinted at horrors, and they would have gone by rail like lambs, taking you with them. Lady Turnour can do nothing like a lamb, I contradicted him. I should never have forgiven you for sending me away from the car. Besides, Lady Turnour wants to turf up to the chateau in her 60-horsepower Aigle and make an impression on the aristocracy. Well, we must hope for the best now, said he. But look, the snow's an inch thick by the roadside even at this level, so I don't know what we mayn't be in for. Between here and Saint-Fleur, which is much higher, the highest point we shall have to pass in getting to the Chateau de Roquemartin, a few miles out of Clermont-Ferrand. You think we may get stuck? It's possible. Well, that would be an adventure. You know I love adventures. But I know the Turners don't, and if... He didn't finish his sentence. High we mounted, until half France seemed to lie spread out before us, and a solitary signpost with Paris-Perpignan suggested unbelievable distances. The Aigle glided up gradients like the side of a somewhat toppling house, and scarcely needed to change speed, so well did she like the rarefied mountain air. I liked it too, though I had to be thankful for the plaid, and above all, I liked the wild loneliness of the Cos, which was unlike anything I ever saw or imagined. The savage monotony of the heights was broken just often enough by oases of pine wood, and the plains on which we looked down were blistered with conical hills, crowned with ancient castles which would have rejoiced the hearts of medieval painters as they did mine. Séverac-les-Châteaux, perched on its naked pinnacle of rock, was best of all, as we saw it from our bird's-eye view, and then again almost startlingly impressive when we had somehow whirled down below it to pass under its old huddled town before we flew up once more to higher and whiter levels. Never had the car gone better, but Lady Turnour had objected to the early start which the chauffeur wanted, and the sun was nearly overhead when many a huge shoulder of glittering marble still walled us away from our journey's end. The cold was the pitiless cold of northern midwinter, and I remembered with a shiver that Millau and Clermont-Ferrand were separated from one another by nearly 250 kilometres of such mountain roads as these. Oh yes, it was an experience, a splendid, dazzling experience. Nevertheless, my cowardly thoughts would turn, sunflower-like, toward warmth, warm rooms, even stuffy rooms without a single window open, fires crackling and hot things to drink. Still, I wouldn't admit that I was cold, and stiffened my muscles to prevent a shudder when my brother asked me cheerfully if I would enjoy a visit to the Gouffre de Padurac close by. A gouffre on such a day! Not all the splendours of the posters which I had often seen and admired could thrill me to a desire for the expedition. But I tried to cover my real feelings with the excuse that it must now be too late to make even a small detour. Mr. Jack Dane laughed and replied that he had no intention of making it, he had only wanted to test my pluck. I believe you'd pretend to be delighted if I told you we had plenty of time and mustn't miss going, said he. But don't be frightened. This isn't a Gouffre de Padurac day, though it really is a pity to pass it by. What do you say to lunch instead? And we rolled through a magnificent medieval gateway into the ancient and unpronounceable town of Marvejols. Before he had time to make the same suggestion to his more important passengers, it came hastily from within the glass cage. So we stopped at an inn which proudly named itself a hotel, and chauffeur and maid were entertained in a kitchen destitute of air and full of clamour. Nevertheless, it seemed a snug haven to us, and never was any soup better than the soup of marvels, as Sir Samuel and Lady Turnour called the place. The word was push on, however, for we had still the worst before us and a long way to go. The Quality had promised to finish its luncheon in an hour, and well before the time was up, we two worms were out in the cold, each engaged in fulfilling its own mission. I was arranging rugs. The chauffeur was pouring some libation from a long-nosed tin upon the altar of his goddess when our master appeared, wearing such an "I haven't stolen the cream or eaten the canary" expression that we knew at once something new was in the wind. He coughed and floundered into explanations. "The waiter, who can speak some English, has been frightening her ladyship," said he. "After the day before yesterday, she's grown a bit timid, and to hear that the cold she has suffered from is nothing to what she may have to experience higher up and later in the day, as the sun gets down behind the mountains, has put her off motoring. It seems we can go on from here by train to Clermont-Ferrand, and that's what she wants to do. I hate deserting the car, but after all, this is an expedition of pleasure, and if her ladyship has a preference, why shouldn't it be gratified?" "Quite so, sir," responded the chauffeur, his face a blank. "My first thought on making up my mind to the train was to have the car shipped at the same time," went on Sir Samuel, "but it seems that can't be done. There's lots of red tape about such things, and the motor might have to wait days on end here at Marvel's before getting off, to say nothing of how long she might be on the way. Whereas I've been calculating. If you start now and go as quick as you can, you ought to be at the chateau," he pronounced it chateau, "before us. Our train doesn't leave for more than an hour, and it's a very slow one. Still, it will be warm, and we have cards and Tolkien's novels. Then, you can unload the luggage at the chateau and run back to the railway station at Clermont-Ferrand. See to having our big boxes sent out, they'll be there waiting for us, and meet our train. What do you think of the plan?" "It ought to do very well, if I'm not delayed on the road by snow." "Do you expect to be?" "I hope not, but it's possible." "Well, her ladyship has made up her mind, and we must risk it. I'll trust you to get out of any scrape." The chauffeur smiled. "I'll try not to get into one," he said. "And I'd better be off, unless you have further instructions?" "Only the receipt for the luggage. Here it is," said Sir Samuel. "And here are the keys for you, Elise. Her ladyship wants you to have everything unpacked by the time she arrives. Oh, and the rugs. We shall need them in the train." "Isn't Mademoiselle going with you?" asked my brother, showing surprise at last. "No. Her mistress thinks it would be better for her to have everything ready for us at the chateau. You see, it will be almost dinner time when we get there." "But, sir, if the car's delayed—" "Well," cut in Sir Samuel, "we must chance it, I'm afraid. The fact is, her ladyship is in such a nervous state that I don't care to put any more doubts into her head. She's made up her mind what she wants, and we'd better let it go at that." If I'd been near enough to my brother, I should have stamped on his foot, or seized some other forcible method of suggesting that he should kindly hold his tongue. As it was, my only hope lay in an imploring look, which he did not catch. However, in pity for Sir Samuel, he said no more, and before we were 3 minutes older, if her ladyship had yearned to have me back, it would have been too late. We were off together, and another day had been given to us for ours. The chauffeur proposed that I should sit inside the car, but I had regained all my courage in the hot inn kitchen. I was not cold, and didn't feel as if I should ever be cold again. The road mounted almost continuously. Sometimes, as we looked ahead, it seemed to have been broken off short just in front of the car by some dreadful earth convulsion, but it always turned out to be only a sudden dip down or a sharp turn like the curve of an apple paring. At last we had reached the highest peak of the roof of France, a sloping, snow-covered roof, but steep as was the slant, very little of the snow appeared to have slipped off. The Cevennes on our right loomed near and bleak, the Auvergne stretched endlessly before us, and the virgin snow, pure as Edelweiss, was darkened in the misty distance by patches of shadow, purple-blue, like beds of early violets. At first, but a thin white sheet was spread over our road, but soon the lace-like fabric was exchanged for a fleecy blanket, then a thick quilt of down, and the motor began to pant. The winds seemed to come from all ways at once, shrieking like witches, and flinging their splinters of ice, fine and small as broken needles, against our cheeks. Still, I would not go inside. I could not bear to be warm and comfortable while Jack faced the cold alone. I knew his fingers must be stiff, though he wouldn't confess to any suffering, and I wished that I knew how to drive the car so that we might have taken turns, sitting with our hands in our pockets. In the deepening snow we moved slowly, the wheels slipping now and then, unable to grip. Then, on a steep incline, there came a report like a revolver shot, but it didn't frighten me now. I knew it meant a collapsed tire, not a concealed murderer, but there couldn't have been a much worse place for jacking up. Nevertheless, it's an ill tire that blows up for its own good alone, and the 40 minutes out of a waning afternoon made the chauffeur's cold hands hot and the hot engine cold. Starting on again, we had 10 miles of desolation, then a tiny hamlet which seemed only to emphasize that desolation. Again another 10-mile stretch of desert and another hamlet. Here and there a glimpse of the railway line, like a great black snake lost in the snow. Now and then the gilded picture of an ancient town, crowning some tall crag that stood up from the flat plain below like a giant bottle. And there was one thrilling view of a high viaduct, flinging a spider's web of glittering steel across a vast and shadowy ravine. "Garabet," said the chauffeur as he saw it, and I remembered that this road was not new for him. He did not talk much. Was he thinking of the companion who perhaps had sat beside him before? I wondered. Was it because he thought continually of her that he looked at me wistfully sometimes, often in silence, wishing me away maybe, and the woman who had spoiled his life by his side again, for good or ill? Suddenly we plunged into a deep snowbank, which deceitfully levelled a dip in the road, and the car stopped, trembling like a horse caught by the hind leg while in full gallop. On went the first speed, most powerful of all, but not powerful enough to fight through snow nearly up to the hubs. The Egler was prisoned like a rat in a trap, and could neither go back nor forward. "Well?" I questioned, half laughing, half frightened at this fulfillment of the morning's prophecy. "Sit still, and I'll try to push her through," said Jack, jumping out into the deep snow. "It's only a drift in a hollow, you see, and we should have got by the worst, just up there at Saint Fleur." I looked where his nod indicated, and saw a town as dark and seemingly as old as the rock out of which it grew, climbing a conical hill to dominate all the wide white reaches above which it stood like an armoured sentinel on a watchtower. As I gazed, struck with admiration, which for an instant made me forget our plight, he began to push. The car, surprised at his strength and determination, half decided to move, then changed her mind and refused to budge. In a second, before he could guess what I meant to do, I had flashed out of my seat into the snow and was wading in his tracks to help him when he snatched me up, a hand on either side of my waist, and swung me back into my place again. "Little wretch!" he exclaimed. "How dare you disobey me?" Then I was vexed, for it was ignominious to be treated as a child when I had wanted to aid him like a comrade. "You are very unkind, very rude," I said. "You wouldn't dare to do that, or speak like that to her." He laughed loudly. "What? Haven't you forgotten her?" As if I ever could. "Well, I may tell you, it's because I did dare to speak like that to a woman that I'm a chauffeur stuck in the snow with another man's car, and the rest is another epithet which concerns me, I suppose," I remarked with dignity, though suddenly I felt the chill of the icy air far, far more cruelly than I had felt it yet. I was so cold in this white desolation that it seemed I must die soon, and it wouldn't matter at all if I were buried under the drifts, to be found in the late spring with violets growing out of the places where my eyes once had been. "Yes," said he, in that cool way he has, which can be as irritating as a chilblain. "It was an epithet concerning you, But luckily for me, I stopped to think before I spoke, an accomplishment I'm only just beginning to learn. I swallowed something much harder and bigger than a cannonball and said nothing. Of course, you're covered up with snow to your knees, foolish child. He was glaring ferociously at me. It doesn't matter. It does matter most infernally. Don't you know that you make no more than a featherweight of difference to the car? I feel as if I weighed 1,000 pounds now. It's that snow. No, it's you, your crossness. I can't have people cross to me on lonely mountains just when I'm trying to help them. His glare of rage turned to a stare of surprise. Cross? Do you think I was cross to you? Yes, and you just stopped in time or you would have been worse. Oh, I see, he said. You thought that the epithet was going to be invidious, did you? Naturally. Well, it wasn't. No, I won't say it. That will be the last folly. But I wasn't going to be cross. I can't have you think that, whatever happens. Now sit still and be good while I push again. I weighed no more than half the 1,000 pounds now, and the cannonball had dissolved like a chocolate cream. But the car stood like a rock, fixed, immutable. There ought to be 6 of me, said the chauffeur. Look here, little pal, there's nothing else for it. I must trudge off to St. Fleur and collect the missing 5. Are you afraid to be left here alone? Of course I said no, but when he had disappeared walking very fast, I thought of a large variety of horrors that might happen. Almost everything, in fact, from an earthquake to a mad bull. As the sun leaned far down towards the west, the level red light lay like pools of blood in the snow hollows, and the shadows came alive as they used when I was a child lying awake, alone, watching the play of the fire on wall and ceiling. Long minutes passed, and at last I could sit still no longer. Gaily risking my brother's displeasure, now I knew that he wasn't cross, I slipped out into the snow again, opened the car door, stood in the doorway, hanging on with one hand, and after much manoeuvring, extricated the tea basket from among spare tires and luggage on the roof. Then, swinging it down, planted it inside the car, opened it, and scooped up a kettleful of snow. As soon as the big white lump had melted over a rose and azure flame of alcohol, I added more snow, and still more, until the kettle was filled with water. By the time I had warmed and dried my feet on the automatic heater under the floor, the water bubbled, and as jets of steam began to pour from the spout, I saw 6 figures approaching, dark as if they had been cut out in black velvet against the snow. Tea for 7, I said to myself, but the kettle was large, if the cups were few. It took half an hour to dig the car out and push her up from the hollow where the snow lay thickest. When she stood only a foot deep, she consented readily to move. We bade goodbye to the 5 men for whom we had emptied our not too well-filled pockets and forged bumbling past St. Fleur. It was a great strain for a heavy car, and the chauffeur only said, "I thought so," when a chain snapped 5 or 6 miles farther on. "What a good thing Lady Turnour isn't here," said I, as he doctored the wounded eagle. "Lots of girls would be in a blue funk," said he. "I could shake that beastly woman for not taking you with her." "Oh," I exclaimed, "when I'm not doing you any harm." He glanced up from his work, and then, as if on an irresistible impulse, left the chain to come and stand beside me as I sat wrapped up in his gift for a good girl. He gazed at me for a moment without speaking, and I wonderingly returned the gaze, not knowing what was to follow. The moon had come sailing up like a great silver ship over the snow billows and gleamed against a sky which was still a garden of full-blown roses not yet faded, though sunset was long over. The soft, pure light shone on his dark face, cutting it out clearly, and he had never looked so handsome. "You don't mean to do me any harm, do you?" he said. "I couldn't if I would, and wouldn't if I could," I answered in surprise. "Yet you do me harm." "You're joking." "I never was further from joking in my life. You do me harm because you make me wish for something I can't have, something that's a constant fight with me ever since we've been thrown together, not to wish for, not to think of. Yet you say I'm cross. Now, do you know what I mean? And will you help me a little to remain your faithful brother instead of tempting me, however unconsciously, to wish for... What a fool I am. I'm going to finish my mending. I sat perfectly still, with my mouth open, feeling as if it were my chain, not the car's, which had broken. Of course, if it hadn't been for all his talk of her, I should have known, or thought that I knew, well enough what he meant. But how could I take his strange words and stammered hints for what they seemed to suggest, knowing as I did, from his own veiled confessions, that he was in love with some beautiful fiend who had ruined his career and then thrown him over? I longed to speak, to ask him just one question, but I dared not. No words would come, and perhaps if they had, I should have regretted them, for I was so sure he was not a man who would fall out of love with one woman to tumble into love for another, that I didn't know what to make of him. But the thought which his words shot into my mind, swift and keen, and then tore away again, showed me very well what to make of myself. If I hadn't quite known before, I knew suddenly, all in a minute, that I was in love. Oh, but humiliatingly deep in love, with the chauffeur. It seemed to me that no nice, well-regulated girl could ever have let herself go tobogganing down such a steep hill, splash into such a sea of love, unless the man were at the bottom in a boat, holding out his arms to catch her as she fell. But the chauffeur hadn't the slightest intention of holding out his arms to the poor little motor maid. He went on mending the chain, and when he got into the car beside me again, he began to talk about the weather. End of chapter 24.
Chapter 25 of The Motor Maid. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by MFQ1. The Motor Maid by Charles Norris Williamson and Alice Muriel Williamson. Chapter 25. It was 10 o'clock when we came into Clermont-Ferrand, which looked a beautiful old place in the moonlight, with a great white Puy de Dôme floating halfway up the sky like a marble dream palace. I trembled for our reception at the chateau, for everything would be our fault, from the snow on the mountains to Lady Turnour's lack of a dinner dress, and the consciousness of our innocence would be our sole comfort. Not for an instant did we believe that it would help our case to stop at the railway station and arrange for the big luggage to be sent the first thing in the morning. Nevertheless, we satisfied our consciences by doing it, though we were so hungry that everything uneatable seemed irrelevant. A young woman in a book, who had just pried into the depths of her soul and discovered there a desperate love, would have loathed the thought of food, but evidently I am unworthy to be a heroine, for my imagination called up visions of soup and steak, and because it seemed so extremely important to be hungry, I could quite well put off being unhappy until tomorrow. It is only 3 miles from Clermont-Ferrand to the Château de Roquemartin, and we came to it easily without inquiries. Jack having carefully studied the road map with Sir Samuel, he had only to stop at the porter's lodge to make sure we were right, and then to tuff up a long straight avenue, sounding our musical siren as an announcement of our arrival. It was only when I saw the fine old mansion on a terraced plateau, its creamy stone white as pearl in the moonlight, its rows upon rows of windows ablaze, that I remembered my position disagreeably. I was going to stay at this charming place as a servant, not as a member of the house party. I would have to eat in the servants' hall. I, Liz d'Angely, whose family had been one of the proudest in France. Why, the name de Roquemartin was as nothing beside ours. It had not even been invented when ours was already old. What would my father say if he could see his daughter arriving thus at a house which would have been too much honored by a visit from him? I was suddenly ashamed. My boasted sense of humor, about which I am usually such a Pharisee, sulked in a corner and refused to come out to my rescue, though I called upon it. Funny it might be to eat in the kitchens of inns, but I could not feel that it was funny to be relegated to the servants' brigade in the private house of a countryman of my father. What queerly complicated creatures we little human animals are! An avalanche of love hadn't destroyed my hunger. A knife thrust in my vanity killed it in an instant, and I can't believe this was simply because I'm female. I shouldn't be surprised if a man might feel exactly the same, or more so. Oh dear, I sighed. It's going to be horrid here, but, with a stab of remorse for my self-absorption, it's just as bad for you as for me. You don't need to stay in the house, though. You're a man and free. Don't stop for my sake. I won't have it. Please live in an inn. There's sure to be one nearby. I'm not going to look for it, said my brother. You needn't worry about me. I've got pretty callous. I shall have quarters for nothing here. You're always preaching economy. But I wouldn't be convinced. Pooh, you're only saying that, so that I won't think you're sacrificing yourself for me. Do you know anything about the Roquemartins? A little. Good gracious, I hope you've never met them. I believe I lunched here with them once 3 years ago, with a motoring friend of theirs. He stated this fact so quietly that if I hadn't begun to know him and his ways, I might have supposed him indifferent to the situation, but I can hardly say why I didn't suppose it. I supposed just the contrary, and I respected him, and his calmness 20 times more than before, if that were possible. Besides, I would have loved him 20 times more, only that was impossible. How much stronger and better he was than I who blurted out my every feeling, I, a stranger, felt the position almost too hateful for endurance, simply because it was ruffling to my vanity. He, an acquaintance of these people, who had been their guest, resigned himself to herding with their servants because, yes, I knew it, because he would not let me bear annoyances alone. You shan't stop in that house, I gasped. Leave me in the luggage. Drive the car to the nearest village. I don't want to leave you. Can't you understand that? He said. I'm not sacrificing myself. We were at the door. We had been heard. If I had suddenly been endowed with the eloquence of Demosthenes, the gift would have come too late. The door was thrown open, not by servants, but by a merry, curious crowd of ladies and gentlemen, anxious to see the arrival of the belated, no doubt much talked of, automobile. Light streamed out from a great hall, which seemed, at first glance, to be half full of people in evening dress, girls and young men, gay and laughing. Everybody was talking at the same time, chattering both English and French, nobody listening to anybody else, all intent on having a glimpse of the car. I believe they were disappointed not to see it battered by some accident. Sensations are so dear to the hearts of idle ones. Sir Samuel Turnour came out, with 2 young men and a couple of girls, while Lady Turnour, afraid of the cold, remained on the threshold in a group of other women, among whom she was violently conspicuous by the blazing of her jewels. The others were all in dinner dress with very few jewels. She had attempted to atone for her blouse and short skirt by putting on all her diamonds and a rope or 2 of pearls. Poor woman! I knew her capable of much. I had not supposed her capable of this. Instinct told me that one of the young men with Sir Samuel was the Marquis de Roquemartin, and I trembled with physical dread as if under a lifted lash of his greeting to Jack. But the pince-nez over prominent nearsighted eyes gave me hope that my chauffeur might be spared an unpleasant ordeal. Joy! The Marquis did not appear to recognize him, and neither did the Marquis, if she were one of the young women who had run out to the car. Maybe if he could escape recognition now, he might escape altogether. Once swept away among the flotsam and jetsam below stairs, he would be both out of sight and out of mind. I did not care about myself now, only for him, and I was beginning to cheer up a little, when I noticed that the other young man was gazing at the chauffeur very intently. His flushed face and small fair moustache, his light eyes and hair, looked as English as the Marquis's short-pointed chestnut beard and sleek hair en brosse looked French. Bertie, I said to myself, flashing a glance at him from under my veil. Bertie, if Bertie it was, did not speak. He simply stared, mechanically, pulling an end of his tiny moustache, while Sir Samuel talked. But he was so much interested in his stepfather's chauffeur that when the really very pretty girl near him spoke over his shoulder, he did not hear. "Well, we began to think you'd tumbled over a precipice," exclaimed Sir Samuel, with the jovial loudness that comes to men of his age from good champagne or the rich red wines of southern France. Jack explained. The fair-haired young man let him finish in peace and then said slowly, "Isn't your name Dane?" "It is," replied my brother. "Thought I knew your face," went on the other. "So you've taken to chauffeuring as a last resort, what?" He was intended by Providence to be good-looking, but so snobbish was his expression as he spoke, so cruelly sarcastic his voice, that he became hideous in my eyes. A bleached skull grinning over a tall collar could not have seemed more repulsive than the pink, healthy features of that young man with his single eyeglass and his sneer. Jack paid no more attention than if he had not heard, but the slight stiffening of his face and raising of his eyebrows as he turned to Sir Samuel made him look supremely proud and distinguished, incomparably more a gentleman in his dusty leather livery than Bertie in his well-cut evening clothes. "I called at the railway station, and the luggage will be here before 8 tomorrow morning," he said quietly. All right," replied Sir Samuel, slow to understand what was going on, but uncomfortable between the two young men. "I didn't know that you were acquainted with my stepson, Dane." "It was scarcely an acquaintance, sir," said the chauffeur, "and I wasn't aware that Mr. Stokes was your stepson." "If you had been, you jolly well wouldn't have taken the engagement, what?" remarked Bertie with a hateful laugh. This time Jack condescended to look at him, from the head down, from the feet up. "Really," he said, after an instant's reflection, "it wouldn't have been fair to Sir Samuel to feel a prejudice on account of the relationship. If one of the servants would kindly show me the garage." End of chapter 25.
Chapter 26 of The Motor Maid. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Motor Maid by Charles Norris Williamson and Alice Muriel Williamson. Chapter 26. If it hadn't been for the hope of seeing Jack again, I should have said that I wanted nothing to eat when I was asked. But I thought that he might come to the servants' dining room, if only because he would expect to find me there, and I was right, he came. "What an imbroglio," I whispered, as he joined me at the table, where hot soup and cold chicken were set forth. "Not at all," said he cheerfully. "Things are better for me than I thought. Martin didn't recognise me, I'm sure, for if he had, he would have said so. He isn't a snob. But I rather hoped he would have forgotten. I came as a stranger, brought by a friend of his and mine, was here only for a meal. We were motoring then too, and it's 3 years ago." "But the Marquise?" "She's a brand new one. I fancied I'd heard that the wife died. This one has the air of a bride, and I should say she's an American." "Yes, she is. The maid who showed me my room told me. The other girl who came out of doors is her sister. They're fearfully rich, it seems, and that young brute wants to marry her." "Thank you for the descriptive adjective, my little partisan, but you're troubling yourself for me more than you need. I don't mind, really. It's all in a lifetime, and I knew when I went in for this business that I should have to take the rough with the smooth. I was down on my luck and glad to get anything. What I have got is honest and something that I know I can do well, something I enjoy too. And I'm not going to let a vulgar young snob like that make me ashamed of myself when I have nothing to be ashamed of." "You ought to be proud of yourself, not ashamed," I cried to him, trying to keep my eyes cold. "Heaven knows there's little enough to be proud of. You'd see that if I bored you with my history, and perhaps I will some day. But anyhow, I've nothing which I need to hide." "As if I didn't know that, but Bertie hates you." "I don't much blame him for that. In a way, the position in which we stand to each other is a kind of poetical justice. I don't blame myself either, for I always did loathe a cad, and Stokes is a cad par excellence. He visited, more or less on sufferance, at 2 or 3 houses where I used to go a good deal in my palmy days. How he got asked originally, I don't exactly know, for the people weren't a bit his sort. But money does a lot for a man in these days, and once in he wasn't easy to get rid of. He had a crawling way with anyone he hoped to squeeze any advantage out of. "I suppose he crawled to you, then?" I broke in. "He did try it on a bit, because I knew people he wanted to know, but it didn't work. I rather put myself out to be rude to him, for I resented a fellow like that worming himself into places where he had no earthly right to be, no right of brains or heart or breeding. I must admit, now I think of it, that he has several scores to wipe off, and judging from the way he begins, he will wipe hard. Let him." "No, no," I protested. "You mustn't let him. It's too much. You will have to tell Sir Samuel that he must find a new chauffeur at once. It hurts me like a blow to think of such a creature humiliating you. I couldn't see it done." He looked at me very kindly, with quite all a brother's tenderness. "My dear little pal," he said, "you won't have to see it." "You mean you will go?" Of course I wanted him to take my advice, or I wouldn't have offered it, yet it gave me a heartache to think he was ready to take it so easily. "I mean that I'm not the man to let myself be humiliated by a Bertie Stokes. Possibly he may persuade his stepfather to sack me, but I don't think he'll succeed in doing that even if he tries. Sir Samuel, I suppose, has given him everything he has, sent him to Oxford, I know he was there and scraped through by the skin of his teeth, and allows him thousands enough to mix with the set where he doesn't belong. But though the old boy is weak in some ways, he has a strong sense of justice, and where he likes he is loyal. I think he does like me, and I don't believe he'd discharge me to please his stepson. Not only that, I should be surprised if the promising Bertie wanted me discharged. It would be more in his line to want me kept on, so that he might take it out of me." I shuddered, but Jack smiled, showing his white teeth almost merrily. "You may see some fun," he said, "but it shan't be death to the frogs. Not so bad as that. And I shall have you to be kind to me." "Kind to you?" I echoed, rather tremulously. "If he only knew how kind I should like to be. Yes, I will be kind, but I can't do anything to make up for what you'll have to bear. You had better go." "Perhaps I would if I could take you away with me, but that can't be. And no, even in that case I should prefer to stick it out. I shouldn't like to let that young bounder drive me from a place, whether I wanted to go or not. And do you think I would clear out and leave him to worry you?" "He can't," I said. "I wish I were sure of that. When the beast sees you without your veil. Oh, hang it, you mustn't let him come near you, you know." "He isn't likely to take the slightest notice of his stepfather's wife's maid," said I, "especially as he's dying to marry the American heiress here. Anyhow, be careful." "I shan't look at him if I can help it, and we shall be gone before long. I believe the Turnours' invitation, which their Bertie was bribed to ask for, is only for 2 or 3 days. How you must have been feeling when you were told to drive here, but you showed nothing." "I had a qualm or two when I was sure of the place, but then it was over. It's far worse for you than for me, and I told you I've been learning from you a lesson of cheerfulness. I was merely a stoic before." "It's nothing for me comparatively," I said, and by this time I was quite sincere, but I didn't know then what the next 24 hours were to bring. We were not left alone for long, but in 10 minutes we had had our talk out, while we played at eating the meal we had looked forward to with eagerness before our appetites were crowded into the background. A fat sous chef flitted about. Maids and valets glanced in. Nevertheless, we found time for a heart-warming hand-pressure before we parted for the night. Altogether I had not had more than 15 minutes in the dining-room, yet when I left I felt 100 times braver and more cheerful. Already I had been to my mistress's quarters. The maid who took charge of me on my arrival showed me that room before she showed me mine, and explained the way from one to the other. My bump of locality was tested, however, in getting back to her ladyship's part of the house, for the castle has its intricacies. The word chateau in France covers a multitude of comfortable, unpretentious family mansions, as I had not to find out now for the first time, and the dwelling of the Roquemartins, though a fine old house of the 17th century, is no more imposing under its high slate roof than many another. It is Lady Turnour's first experience, though, as a visitor in the mansions of the great, and when I had been briskly unpacking for half an hour or so, she came in, somewhat subdued by her new emotions. I think that she was rather glad to see a familiar face, to have someone to talk to of whom she did not feel in awe, with whom she need not be afraid of making some mistake, and she seemed quite human to me for the first time. Never had I seen her in such an expansive mood, not even when she gave me the blouse. Instead of the cross words I had braced myself to expect, she was almost friendly. She had felt a fool, she said, not being able to dress for dinner, but then no one else could touch her for jewels, and didn't everyone just stare at the table, though, of course, she hadn't put on her tiara, as that wouldn't have been suitable with a blouse and short skirt. Sir Samuel's stepson had been quite nasty and superior about the jewels when he got at her afterward, and she believed would have been rude if he dared, but luckily he didn't know her well enough for that, and he'd better be careful how far he went, or he'd find things very different from what they'd been with him since his mother married Sir Samuel. As if men knew when women ought to wear jewels and when not. But he was green with jealousy of the things his stepfather had given her, wanted everything himself. She went on to describe the other members of the house party and mouthed their titles with delight, though she had only her own maid to impress. Everyone had a title, it seemed, except Bertie, and the American girl he wanted to marry, Miss Nelson, a sister of the young Marquise. Some of the titles were very high ones, too. There were princes and princesses, and dukes and duchesses all over the place, mostly French and Italian, though one of the duchesses was American, like the Marquise and her sister. "Not the Duchesse de Milan," I exclaimed, before I stopped to think. "Yes, that's the name," said her ladyship, twisting round to look up at me, as I wound her back hair and curling pins. "What do you know about her?" How I wished that I knew nothing, and that I hadn't spoken. The name had popped out because the Duchesse de Milan is the only American-born duchess of my acquaintance, and because I was hoping very hard that the Duchess of the Château de Roquemartin might not be the Duchesse de Milan. What bad luck that the Roquemartins had selected that particular duchess for this particular house party, when they must know plenty, and could just as well have chosen another specimen. "I have heard her name," I admitted primly, and so I had too often. "A friend of mine was with her once." "As her maid?" "Not exactly. Another sort of servant, I suppose." As her ladyship stated this as a fact rather than asked it as a question, I ventured to refrain from answering. Fortunately, she didn't notice the omission, as her thoughts had jumped to another subject. But mine were not so readily displaced. They remained fastened to the Duchesse de Milan, and while Lady Turnour talked, I was wondering whether I could successfully contrive to keep out of the Duchess's way. She is quite intimate with Cousin Catherine, and I told myself she was pretty sure already to have heard the truth about my disappearance, or if even with her friends Cousin Catherine clings to conventionalities and pretends that I'm visiting somewhere by her consent, people are almost certain to scent a mystery, for mysteries are popular. "If that Duchess woman sees me, she'll write to Cousin Catherine at once," I thought, "or I wouldn't put it past her to telegraph." "Put it past" is an expression of Cousin Catherine's own, which I always disliked, but it came in handy now. I tried to console myself, though, by reflecting that if I were careful, I ought to be able to avoid the Duchess. The ways of great ladies and little maids lie far apart in grand houses, and "There is going to be a servants' ball tomorrow night," announced Lady Turnour, while my thoughts struggled out of a slough of despond, "and I want you to be the best-dressed one there for my credit. We're all going to look on, and some of the young gentlemen may dance. The Marquise and Miss Nelson say they mean to, too. But I should think they are joking. I may not be a French princess, nor yet a Marquise, but I am an English lady, and I must say I shouldn't care to dance with my cook or my chauffeur. Her chauffeur would be at one with her there, but I could think of nothing save myself in this crisis. "Oh, my lady, I can't go to a servants' ball," I exclaimed. She bridled. "Why not, I should like to know? Do you consider yourself above it?" "It isn't that," I faltered. "And it wasn't. It was the Duchess. But, I searched for an excuse. I haven't anything to wear." "I will see to that," said my mistress, with relentless generosity. "I intend to give you a dress, and as you have next to nothing to do tomorrow, you can alter it in time. If you had any gratitude in you, Elise, you'd be out of yourself with joy at the idea." "Oh, I am out of myself, my lady," I moaned. "Well, you might say, 'Thank your ladyship,' then." I said it. "When you have unpacked the big luggage in the morning, I will give you the dress. I have decided on it already. Sir Samuel doesn't like it on me, so I don't mind parting with it, but it's very handsome and cost me a great deal of money when I was getting my trousseau. It is scarlet satin trimmed with green beetle wing passementerie and gold fringe." My one comfort, as I gasped out spasmodic thanks, was this: I would look such a vulgar horror in the scarlet satin trimmed with green beetle wings and gold fringe that the Duchesse de Merlin might fail to recognise Lys d'Angely. End of chapter 26.
Chapter 27 of The Motor Maid. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Motor Maid by Charles Norris Williamson and Alice Muriel Williamson. Chapter 27. I dusted and shook out every cell in my brain during the night, in the hope of finding any inspiration which might save me from the servants' ball. But I could think of nothing, except that I might suddenly come down with a contagious disease. The objection to this scheme was that a doctor would no doubt be sent for, and would read my secret in my lack of temperature. When morning came, I was sullenly resigned to the worst. "Kismet," said I, as I unfolded her ladyship's dresses, and was blinded by the glare of the scarlet satin. "Try it on," commanded my mistress. "I want to get an idea of how you will look." Naturally, the red thing was a directoire thing, and putting it on over my snug little black frock, I was like a cricket crawling into an empty lobster shell. But, to my surprise and annoyance, the lobster shell was actually becoming to the cricket. I didn't want to look nice and be a credit to Lady Turnour. I wanted to look a fright, and didn't care if I were a disgrace to her. But the startling scarlet satin was Liberty satin, and therefore had a sheen, and a soft way of folding that redeemed it somewhat. Its bright poppy color, its emerald beetle wings shading to gold, and its glittering fringes that waved like a wheat field stirred by a breeze, all gave a bizarre sort of value, as artists say, to my pale yellow hair and dark eyes. I couldn't help seeing that the dreadful dress made my skin pearly white, and I was afraid that, when I had altered the thing, instead of looking like a frump, I should only present the appearance of a rather fast little actress. I should be looked at in my scarlet abomination. People would stare and smile. The Duchesse de Merlin would say to the Marquis de Roquemartin, "Who is that young person? She looks exactly like someone I know. That little Lys d'Angely, the millionaire man, Chartier, is so silly about." "You see, you can alter it very easily," said Lady Turnour. "Yes, my lady." "Have you got any dancing slippers?" "No, that is, I don't know." "Don't be stupid. I will give you 10 francs to buy yourself a pair of red stockings and red slippers to match. The stockings needn't be silk. They won't show much. Dane can take you in the car to Clermont-Ferrand this afternoon. I want you to be all right, from head to feet, different from any of the other maids." I didn't doubt that I would be different. Very different. Tap, tap, a knock at the door. "Entrez!" cried her ladyship. The door opened. Mr. Herbert Stokes stood on the threshold. "I say, Lady T," he began, when he saw the scarlet vision, and stopped. "What is it?" inquired the wife of his stepfather, rather a complicated relation. "I wanted," drawled Bertie. "But it doesn't matter. Another time." "You needn't mind her," said Lady Turnour with a nod toward me. "It's only my maid. I'm giving her a dress for the servants' ball tonight." Bertie gave vent to the ghost of a whistle below his breath. He looked at me, twisting the end of his small fair mustache, as he had looked at Jack Dane last night, and though his expression was different, I liked it no better. "Thought it was a new guest," said he. "I suppose you didn't take her for a lady, did you?" My mistress was curious to know. "You pride yourself on your discrimination, your stepfather says." "There's nothing the matter with my discrimination," replied the young man, smiling. But his smile was not for her ladyship. It was for me, and it was meant to be a piquant little secret between us two. How well I remembered asking the chauffeur, "Could you know a Bertie?" and how he answered that he had known one, and consequently didn't want to know another. Here was the same Bertie, and now that I too knew him, I thought I would prefer to know another rather than know more of him. Yet he was good-looking, almost handsome. He had short, curly light hair, eyes as blue as turquoises, seen by daylight, full red lips under the little mustache, a white forehead, a dimple in the chin, and a very good figure. He had also an educated, perhaps too well educated, voice, which tried to advertise that it had been made at Oxford, and he had hands as carefully kept as a pretty woman's, with manicured, filbert-shaped nails. "You're making her jolly smart," he went on. "She'll do you credit." "I want she should," retorted her ladyship, gratified and ungrammatical. "She must give me a dance, what?" condescended the gilded youth. "Does she speak English?" "Yes, so you'd better be careful what you say before her." Bertie telegraphed another smile to me. I looked at the faded damask curtains, at the mantelpiece with its gilded clock and two side pieces, Louise says, at its worst, considered good enough for a bedroom, at the drapings of the enormous bed, at the portière covering the door of Sir Samuel's dressing-room, at the kaleidoscopic claret and blue figures on the carpet, in fact, at everything within reach of my eyes, except Mr. Herbert Stokes. "I've nothing to say that she can't hear," he said, virtuously. "I only wanted to know if you'd like to see the gardens. The Marquise sent me to ask. Several people who haven't been here before are going. It's a lot warmer this morning, so you won't freeze." Lady Turnour said that she would go, and ordered me to find her hat and coat. As I turned to get them, Bertie smiled at me again, and threw me a last glance as he followed my mistress out of the room. I begin to be afraid there is an innate vanity in me which nothing can thoroughly eradicate without tearing me up by the roots. For when I was ready to alter that red dress, instead of trying to make it look as ridiculous as possible, something forced me to do my best, to study fitness and becomingness. I do hope this is self-respect, and not vanity. But to hope that is, I fear, like believing in a thing which you know isn't true. I worked all the morning at ensmalling the gown. If one can enlarge, why can't one ensmall? And by luncheon time it was finished. I had seen Jack at breakfast, but had no chance for a word with him alone, although he succeeded valiantly in keeping other chauffeurs and valets from making my acquaintance. As I stopped only long enough for a cup of coffee and a roll, I didn't give him too much trouble. But at luncheon it was different. Everyone was chattering about the ball in the evening. A privilege promised, it seemed, as a reward for hard work on the occasion of a real ball above stairs. And house servants and visitors alike were all so gay and good-natured that it would have been stupid to snub them. Jack saw this, and though he protected me as well as he could, in an unobtrusive way, he put out no bristles. The general excitement was contagious, and if it hadn't been for the panic I was in about the Duchess, I should have thrown myself wholly into the spirit of the hive, buzzing like the busiest bee in it. Even as it was, I couldn't help entering into the fun of the thing, for it was fun in its queer way. Something like being on the stage of a third-rate theatre, in the midst of a farce, where the actors mistake you for one of themselves, calling upon you to play your part, while you alone know that you are a leading member of the Comédie Française, just dropped in at this funny place to look on. Here, the stage was on a much grander scale, and the play more amusing than in the couriers' dining rooms at the hotels where I had been. At the hotels, the maids and valets scarcely knew each other. Some were in a hurry, others were tired or in a bad humor. Here the little company had been together for days. Meals were a relaxation, a time for flirtation and gossip about their own and each other's masters and mistresses. Each servant felt the liveliest interest in the monsieur or madame of his or her neighbor, and the stories that were exchanged, the criticisms that were made, would have caused the hair of those messieurs and those madames to curl. If I was openly approved by the gentleman's gentlemen, Mr. Jack Dane had the undisguised admiration of the ladies' ladies, and he received their advances with tact. Dances for the evening were asked for and promised right and left among the assemblage, always dependent upon summons from above. It was agreed that, if a monsieur or madame wished to dance with you, no previous engagement was to stand, for all the castles and big houses from afar and near would be emptied in honor of the ball, from drawing-rooms to servants' halls, and quality was to mingle with quantity, as on similar occasions in England, whence, the chef explained, came the fashion. It was a feature of l'entente cordiale, and the same agreeable understanding was to level all barriers, for the night, between high and low. Some of the visitors, femmes de chambre, were pretty coquettish creatures, and I was delighted to find that they were all called by their mistresses' titles. The maid of my bête noire was Duchesse. She who pertained to our hostess was Marquise, and I blossomed into Milady. The girls were looking forward to rivaling their mistresses in chic, and also in the admiration of the real princes and dukes and counts. That they would have an exclusive right to the attentions of these gentlemen's understudies also seemed to be expected. After half an hour at table in the servants' hall, there was nothing left for me to find out about the owners of the castle and their guests. But the principal interest of everyone seemed to center upon the affair between Mr. Herbert Stokes and the heiress sister of Madame la Marquise. There were even bets among the valets as to how it was to end, and Bertie's man, who looked as if he could speak volumes if he would, was a person of importance. All the men admired Miss Nelson extremely, but the women were divided in opinion. Her own maid, a bilious Frenchwoman, with a jealous eye, said that the American miss was une petite chatte, who was playing off Mr. Stokes against the Duc de Divonne, and it was a pity that the handsome young English monsieur could not be warned of her unworthiness. The Duke was not handsome, and he was neither young nor rich, but these Americans were out for titles, just as titles were out for American money. Why else had the marriage of Madame la Marquise, Miss Daisy's elder sister, made itself? Miss Daisy liked Mr. Stokes, but he could not give her a title. The Duke could, if he would. But would he? She was rich, but there were others richer. People said that he was wary. Yet he admired Miss Daisy, it was true, and if, by her flirtation with Mr. Stokes, she could pique him into a proposal, she would have her triumph. This was only one of many dramas going on in the house, but it was the most interesting to me, as to others, and I determined to look with all my might at the Duke and at pretty Miss Nelson, of whom I had only had a glimpse on arriving. If she were really nice, I did hope that Bertie wouldn't get her. My costume pressed as weightily on her ladyship's mind as if I had been a favourite poodle about to be sent, all ribboned and clipped, to a dog show. She did not forget the slippers and stockings, and the chauffeur was ordered to take me into Clermont-Ferrand to buy them. Fortunately, she didn't know how much I looked forward to the excursion. At precisely 3:00, I walked out to the castle garage near the stables and found Jack getting the car ready. But I did not find him alone. The garage is a big and splendid one, and not only were the 3 household dragons in their stalls, but 4 or 5 strange beasts, pets of visitors, and the finest of these, after our blue aigle, was the white majestic of the Duc de Divonne. That gentleman, whom I recognized easily from a description breathed into my ear by a countess's countess at luncheon, was in the garage when I arrived, showing off his automobile to Miss Nelson. The ducal chauffeur lurked in the background, duster in hand, and Mr. Herbert Stokes occupied as large a space as possible in the foreground. Nobody deigned to take any open notice of me, though Bertie threw me a stealthy smile of recognition, carefully screened from Miss Nelson, but as the Eagle was swallowing a last refreshing draught of petrol, I had time to observe the actors in the little drama, whose plot I had already heard. Yes, though Miss Daisy Nelson looked even prettier than I thought her last night, I could quite believe the bilious maid's statement that she was une petite chatte. Her green-gray eyes, very effective under thick masses of auburn hair, were turned up at the outer corners in a fascinating, sly little way, and her cupid bow lips, which turned down at their corners, were a bit redder than nature's formula ordains. Nevertheless, I couldn't help liking her, just as one likes a lovely, playful Persian kitten, which may rub its adorable nose against your hand, or scratch with its naughty claws. And she was enjoying herself so much, the pretty expensive-looking creature. As Pamela would say, it was evident that she was having the time of her life, reveling in the admiration and rivalry of the two men, delighted with her own power over them, and her importance as a beauty and an heiress, the only unmarried girl in the house party, amusing herself by making one man miserable and the other happy, sending them up and down on a mental seesaw by turns. As for the little Duc de Divonne, his profile is of the Roman Emperor order, and his eyes like the last coals in a dying fire. I said to myself that, if Miss Nelson should become a duchess, she would have to pay for some of her girlish antics in pre-duchess days. Still, I decided that if I had to choose, it would be the Duke before Bertie. The girl kept both her men busy, and after the first glance, Bertie ignored my existence. But the Duke, fired by a moment's neglect, flamed out with an inspiration. He dared Miss Nelson to take a lesson from him in driving his car, with no other chaperone than the chauffeur. "All right, I will," said she, "and I bet you I'll be an expert after one trial." "What do you bet?" asked the Duke. She smiled flirtatiously in answer, and Bertie stood forlorn. His nice pink complexion turned an ugly salmon color. In a minute the white car was off, Miss Nelson beside the Duke, the chauffeur like a small nut in a large shell, lolling in the tonneau. Bertie turned to us, and having looked kindly at me, sharply demanded of Jack where he was going. "Mademoiselle has an errand." "Ah, then I'll drive Mademoiselle. Wish I had a tenner for every time I've driven an Eagle. You can sit inside, in case there's work to do." My eyes opened widely, but I said nothing. I glanced at Jack, and saw his face harden. "I have been told to drive the car, and it is my duty to drive it unless I receive different orders," said he. "I'm giving you different orders," said Bertie. "I take my orders only from the owner of the car." "You're beastly impertinent," snapped Bertie, "and I'll report you to Sir Samuel." "As you choose," returned Jack, turning the starting handle. "Why don't you say sir when you speak to me? You don't seem to have trained into chauffeur manners yet." "If I were your chauffeur, you would have the right to criticize. As I'm not, and never will be, you haven't. Mademoiselle, the car is ready. Will you get in?" I jumped into my usual place beside the driver's seat. "Ah, you sit by the chauffeur, do you?" said Bertie. "I don't wonder he wants to keep his job." For an instant I was afraid that Jack would strike him. My blood rushed to my head, and I half rose from the seat, with a choked, warning whisper of, "Jack!" It was the first time I'd called him that, except to myself, and I saw him give the faintest start. He looked at the other man, and then, though Bertie stepped quickly forward as if to open the car door and jump in, he sprang to his place, and we were off. "He means mischief," I said, when I felt able to speak. "So do I, if he does," answered Jack. "I wish you'd do me a favor," I went on. "Keep away from that awful ball tonight." "What, with you there? I know my business better." I couldn't help laughing. "Your present business, I believe," said I, "is that of a chauffeur." with extra duty as a watchdog. I can't bear to have you see me in the ridiculous get-up Lady Turnour is making me wear. That's the selfish part of my reason. And it will be so horrid for you in every way. I'm callous to anything they can do now except one thing." "What?" "If you don't know already, I mean where you're concerned." "You're very kind to me." "Kind? Yes, I am very kind. A man has to be abnormally kind to want to look after a girl like you." "How bitterly you speak!" I exclaimed, hardly understanding him. "I feel bitter sometimes. Do you wonder? But for heaven's sake, don't let's talk of me. Let's talk of something pleasant. Would you care to do a little sightseeing in Clermont-Ferrand, if your shopping doesn't take us too long?" I assured him that it would not take 10 minutes, and it didn't take more. I saved £1 on the transaction, too, which would console her ladyship if I got back a few minutes late, and with that thought in my mind, I abandoned myself to the joy of the expedition. We went to the petrifying fountain and inspected its strange menagerie of stone animals. We made a dash into the cathedral where St. Louis was married, and looked at the beautiful 13th-century glass in the windows and the strange frescoes. We rushed in and out of Notre-Dame-du-Port, stopping on the way in the Place where the First Crusade was proclaimed, and to gaze at the house and statue of Pascal. Jack would squander some of his extremely hard-earned money on a box of the burnt almonds for which Clermont-Ferrand is celebrated, and when we had seen everything I dared stop to see, he ran the car to Montferrand to show me some ancient and wonderful houses, famous all over France. Eventually he threatened to spin me out to Royat, but I pleaded the certainty that Lady Turnour would wish to change into her smartest tea-gown for vif au claquis, and that I must be there to assist at the ceremony. So we turned castleward, with all the speed the law allows, if not a little more, and I arrived with a pair of red stockings, cheap high-heeled slippers, £1 in change, and a queer presentiment of dangerous things to happen. End of chapter 27, read by Nancy Cochran Gorgen, Gilbert, Arizona, April 14, 2025.
Chapter 28 of The Motor Maid. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Louise, Jaeschke. The Motor Maid by Charles Norris Williamson and Alice Muriel Williamson. Chapter 28. Although a good many neighbors were coming to the Château de Roquemartin to look on at the servants' ball, they were all to drive or motor over in their ordinary dinner dress. It was only the servants themselves who were to make toilette. Lady Turnour, however, who regretted having missed the smart ball for the great world given a few nights before, determined that people should be forced to appreciate her wealth and position, and the wardrobe of Solomon in all his glory could hardly have produced anything to exceed her gold tissue diamante. When I had squeezed and poked and pushed her into it, and was bejeweling her, Sir Samuel came, as usual, to have his white cravat tied by me. Bertie, too, appeared, dressed for dinner, and watched me with silent amusement as I performed my evening duty for his stepfather. "Pretty gorgeous, aren't you?" he remarked to Lady Turnour. But she was flattered rather than annoyed by the criticism, and sailed away good-natured, leaving me to gather up the few jewels of her collection which she had discarded. Lately I had been trusted with her treasures, and felt the responsibility disagreeably, especially as my mistress, when she remembered it, counted everything ostentatiously over, after relieving me of my charge. Tonight I had just begun picking up the brooches, bracelets, diamond stars, coronets, and bursting suns which illuminated the dressing-table firmament, when Bertie walked in again through the door that he had left ajar. "I came back because my necktie's a failure," said he. "My man must be in love, I should think, probably with you. Anyhow, something's the matter. His fingers are all thumbs. But you turned out my old governor rippingly. You'll do me, won't you?" As he spoke, he untied his cravat and produced another. "I'm sorry," I said. "I don't know how to do that kind of tie." "What? What?" He stared. "It's just the same as the governor's, only a little better. Come along, there's a dear." He had pushed the door to. Now he shut it. I walked to the other end of the room and began folding a blouse. "You'd better give your valet another trial," I said. "I'm not a valet. I'm Lady Turnour's maid. She's in luck to get you. I'm engaged to wait upon her." "You are stiff. You do the governor's tie. Sir Samuel's very kind to me." "Well, I'll be kind too. I'd like nothing better. I'll be a lot kinder than he'd dare to be. I say, I've got a present for you, something ripping that you'll like. You can wear it at the ball tonight, but you'd better not tell anyone who gave it to you. What? You shall have it for tying my necktie. Now, don't you call that kind?" I stopped folding the blouse and increased my height by at least an inch. "No," I said, "I call it impertinent, and I shall be obliged if you will leave Lady Turnour's room. That's the only thing you can do for me." "By Jove," said Bertie, "what theatre were you at before you took to Lady's Maiden?" To this I deigned no answer. "Anyhow, you're a rippin' little actress." Silence. "And a pretty girl, as pretty as they make 'em." I invented a new kind of sigh, a cross between a snarl and a moan. "Tell me, what's the mystery? There is a mystery about you, you know. Not a bit good trying to deceive me. You might as well own up. I can keep a secret as well as the next one." A tapping of my foot. A slamming of a wardrobe door, which was able to squeak furiously without loss of dignity. "What were you before my lady took you on? Look here, if you don't answer, I shall begin to think the secret's got something to do with those." And he pointed to the dressing table where the jewels still lay. He even put out his hand and took up the bursting sun. How I sympathized with it for bursting. "Worth something, what?" "You can think whatever you like," I flashed at him, "if you'll only get out of this room." "Pity your chauffeur isn't at hand for you to run to." Bertie half sneered, half laughed, for he was keeping his hateful, teasing good nature. "And by the way, talking of him, since you're such a little prude, I'll just warn you in a friendly way to look out for that chap. You don't know his history, what? I'm sure the governor doesn't." "Sir Samuel knows that he can drive and that he's a gentleman," said I, with meaning emphasis. "Well, I've warned you," replied Bertie, injured. "You may see which one of us is really your friend before you're out of this galley. But if you want to be a good and happy little girl, you'd best be nice to me. I shall find out all about you, you know." That was his exit speech, and the only way in which I could adequately express my opinion of it was to bang the door on his back. The ball was in a huge vault of a room which had once been a granary. The stone floor had been worn smooth by many feet and several centuries, and the blank gray walls were brightened with drapery of flags, yards of colored cotton, paper flowers, and evergreens, arranged with an effect which none save Latin hands could have given. Dinner above and below stairs was early, and before 10 the guests began to assemble in the ballroom. All the servant world had dined in ball costume, excepting Jack and myself, and it was only at the last minute that the cricket hopped upstairs and wriggled into its neatly reduced lobster shell. I had visions of my brother lurking gloomily yet observantly in obscure corners, ready at any moment for a sortie in my defense. But when I sneaked, sidled, and slid into the ballroom, making myself as small as possible that I might pass unobserved in spite of my sensational redness, I had a surprise. Near the door stood the chauffeur in evening dress, out-princing and out-duking every prince and duke among the Marquise de Roquemartin's guests. And I, who hadn't even known that he possessed evening clothes, could not have opened my eyes wider if my knight had appeared in full armor. I had broken the news of the scarlet dress to him. Nevertheless, I saw it was a shock. To each one, the other was a new person. As we stood and talked together, I said not a word about my scene with Bertie, for there was trouble enough between the two already. But when Jack told me that, if I were asked to dance by anyone objectionable, I must say I was engaged to him, I knew which one loomed the largest and ugliest in his mind. A glance around the big, bright room showed me many strangers. All were servants, however, for the grand people had not yet come down to play their little game of condescension. A band from Clermont-Ferrand was making music, but the ball was to be opened by the Marquise and her guests, who were to honor their servants by dancing the first dance with them. Each noble lady was to select a cook, butler, footman, chauffeur, or groom, according to her pleasure, and each noble lord was to lead out the female worm which least displeased his eye. Hardly had I time to dive deep into the wave of domesticity when the great moment arrived, and a spray of aristocracy sprinkled the top of that heavy wave with the dazzling sparkle of its jewels and beauty. Really, it was a pretty sight. I had to admire it, and in watching the play of light and color, I forgot my private worries until I saw Bertie bowing before me. The Marquise had just honored her own butler. The Marquis was offering his arm to the housekeeper. The Duc de Divonne had led out Miss Nelson's bilious maid, appalling in apple green. Miss Nelson was returning the compliment by giving her hand to his valet. Why should not this young gentleman dance with his stepmother-in-law's maid? There seemed to be no reason why not, except the maid's disinclination, and sudden side-slip of the brain caused by the glassy impudence of Mr. Stokes' eye so disturbed my equilibrium that I forgot Jack's offer. He did not forget, however. It would hardly have been Jack if he had, but stepped forward to claim me as I began to stammer some excuse. "Oh, come, that isn't playing the game," said Bertie. "We're all dancing with the servants this turn. Go ask a lady, Dane." "I have asked a lady, and she has promised to dance with me," said Jack. "Miss d'Angely?" "Oh, that's the lady's name, is it? I'm glad to know," mumbled Bertie, as Jack whisked me away from under his nose. "By Jove, I oughtn't to have let that out, ought I?" said Jack, remorseful. "The less he knows about you, the better. And as Lady Turnour has no idea of pronunciation, if it hadn't been for my stupidity—" "Don't call it that," I stopped him as we began to dance. "It doesn't matter a bit, unless it should occur to the Duchess de Melun to ask him questions about me, and I'd rather not think about that possibility, or anything else disagreeable, to spoil this heavenly waltz." "You can dance a little, can't you?" said Jack, in a tone and with a look that made the words better than any compliment any other man had ever paid me on my dancing, though I'd been likened to feathers and vine tendrils and various poetically airy things. "You aren't so bad yourself, brother. I retorted in the same tone. Our steps suit, don't they? He muttered something which sounded like, just a little better than anything else on earth, that's all. But of course, it couldn't really have been what my ears tried to make my vanity believe. When we stopped, which we didn't do while there was music to go on with, I was conscious that people were looking at us, and nobody with more interest than the Duchess de Melun. I glanced hastily away before my eye had quite caught hers, but no female thing needs to give a whole eye to what is going on around her. I knew, although my back was soon turned in her direction, that the Duchess de Melun was talking to Lady Turnour, and I guessed the subject of the conversation. Thank goodness my mistress's mind had never compassed more than a misleading Elise, and thank goodness also many of the great folk were preparing to leave us humble ones to ourselves, now that their condescension had been proved in the first dance. Would the Duchess go? Yes, oh, joy! She gets up from her seat. She moves to the door. Lady Turnour has risen too, but sits down again, lured by the proximity of a princess. All will be well, perhaps. The Duchess mayn't think of catechizing Bertie, now that my mistress has put her off the track. He, with several other young men, evidently means to stop and see the fun out. If only he would sit still, now, beside the Marquise. But no, Miss Nelson and the Duc de Divonne are going out together. Bertie must needs jump up and dash across the room for a word with the girl. Discouraged by some laughing answer flung over her shoulder, he almost bumps against the Duchess. Horror! She speaks to him quite eagerly. She puts a question. He replies. She bends her head near to him. They walk slowly out of the room, talking. All is up with Lys d'Angely. The next thing that meddlesome Mattie of a Duchess will do is to wire Cousin Catherine Milvain. Crash, thunder, lightning, hail! Monsieur Charretier on my track again. I resolved, as I saw myself laying shattered at my own feet, to pick up the bits and say nothing to Jack, lest he should blame his own inadvertent dropping of my name for all present and future mischief. Being a man, he can only see things with his eyes, and as he happened to be looking at me, he missed the pantomime at the other end of the room. I was looking at him too, but of course that didn't prevent me from seeing other things, and while I was chatting with him and wondering how long it might be before the thunderbolt, Monsieur Charretier, should fall, I received another invitation to dance. This time it was from a delightful old boy who looked 60 and felt 21. He was ruddy brown with tight gray curls on his head and deep dimples in his cheeks. If anyone had told me that he was not an English admiral, I should have known it was a fib. "I hope you aren't engaged for this next waltz," said he. "I should like very much to have it with you." And he spoke as nicely as he would to a young girl of his own world, although he must have heard from someone that I was a lady's maid. I glanced at Jack, but evidently he approved of admirals as partners for his sister. He kept himself in the background, smiling benevolently, and I skipped away with my brown old sailor as the music for the dance began. "Heard you spoke English," said he, encircling my directoire waist with the arm of a sea-going Hercules. "Otherwise, I shouldn't have had the courage to come up and speak to you." I laughed. "A dreadnought afraid of a fishing smack. My word, if you were a fishing smack, my little friend, you wouldn't lack for fish to catch," chuckled the old gentleman, who was waltzing like an elderly angel, as all sailors do. Now, if Bertie had said what he said, I should have been offended, but coming from the Admiral, it cheered me up. You are an Admiral, aren't you? I was bold enough to ask. Who told you that? He wanted to know. My eyes, said I. They're bright ones, he retorted, but I suppose I do look an old sea dog, what? A regular old saltwater dog. But by George, it's hot water I've got into tonight. Do you see that stout lady we're just passing? The one in the red wig and yellow frock covered with paste or diamonds? If she could have heard that description. It was Lady Turnour in her gold tissue, her Bond Street jewelry shop, and, my charge, her beautifully undulated, copper-tinted transformation. Yes, I see her, I said faintly, as we waltzed past, and I wondered why she was glaring. I suppose you didn't notice me doing the first dance with her. Well, I asked her because they said we'd all got to invite servants to begin with, and as the best were snapped up before I got a chance, I walked over to her like a man. Give me your word, where all are dressed like duchesses, I took her for a cook. I laughed so much that I shook my feet out of time with the music. Did you treat her like a cook, too? I gurgled. Ask her to give you her favorite recipe for soup? Heaven forbid, no. I treated her like a countess. One would, a cook, you know. It was afterward I got into the hot water. I popped her down in a seat when we'd scrambled through a turn or two of the dance, and that was all right. But instead of stopping where she was put, she must have stood up with some other poor chap when my back was turned and been plomped down somewhere else. Anyhow, I danced the end of the waltz with the Marquise de Roquemartin when she'd finished doing the polite to her butler, and when we sat down to breathe at last, for the sake of something to say, I asked if the fat lady in yellow was her own cook or a visitor's cook. Anyhow, I was certain of the cook, fancied myself on spotting a cook anywhere. Well, the Marquise giggled, "Take care," and nearly had a fit. And if there wasn't my late partner close to my shoulder. "That's Lady Turnour, one of my guests," said the Marquise. Little witch, she looked more pleased than shocked, but upon my honor, you could have knocked me down with a feather. I hope the good lady didn't hear, but my friends tell me I talk as if I were yelling through a megaphone, so I'm afraid she got the news. "What did you do?" I gasped. "Do? I jumped up as if I'd been shot and trotted over to ask you to dance. But I expect it will get about." Now I knew why Lady Turnour had glared. Poor woman, I was really sorry for her on this, her happy night. End of chapter 28.
Chapter 29 of The Motor Maid. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Motor Maid by Charles Norris Williamson and Alice Muriel Williamson. It never rains but it pours after dry weather, says Pamela de Nessel. And so it was for the Turnour family. They had had their run of luck, and everything determinedly went wrong for them that night. For her ladyship, there was the dreadful douche of the Admiral's mistake, and the Marquise de Roquemartin coming to hear of it. Wicked little witch, I'm sure she couldn't resist telling the story to everyone. For Bertie, the blow of an announcement before the ball was over that Miss Nelson was going to marry the Duc de Devon, she went out of the room to get engaged to him. For Sir Samuel, a telegram from his London solicitors advising him to hurry home and straighten out some annoying business tangle. After all, however, I doubt that the telegram ought to be classed among disasters, as it gave the family a good excuse to escape without delay from the chateau which they had so much wished to enter. Lady Turnour had hysterics in her bedroom, having retired early on account of a headache. She pretended that her rage was caused by a rent in her golden train, made by that clumsy Admiral Grey who came over with the Frasers and had the impudence to almost force me to dance with him. Gouty old horror! But I know it was the rent in her vanity, not her dress, which made her gurgle and wail and choke, until frightened Sir Samuel patted her on the back, and she stopped short to scold him. Bertie came in ostensibly to learn his father's plans, but really, I surmised, to suggest some of his own, and Lady Turnour relieved her feelings by stirring up evil ones in him. "So sure you were going to get the girl? Why, you wrote your stepfather the other day you were practically engaged," she sneered, delighted that she was not the only one who had suffered humiliation at the castle. "If she hadn't seen you, I believe it would have been all right," growled Bertie, vicious as a chained dog who has lost his bone. And then Lady Turnour had hysterics all over again, and Sir Samuel told Bertie that he was an ungrateful young brute. The three raged together, and I could not go, because I had to hold sal volatile under her ladyship's nose. Lady Turnour said that the Marquise was no lady, and for her part she was glad she wasn't going to have that cat of a sister in her family. She'd leave the beastly chateau that night if she could, but anyhow she'd go the first thing in the morning as ever was, so there. People that let their visitors be insulted and did nothing but laugh! She'd show them, if they ever came to London, that she would, though she mightn't be a marquise herself exactly. Not one of the lot should ever be invited to her house, not if they were all married to Bertie. And who was Bertie, anyhow? Sir Samuel said darling to her, and quite different words that began with D to her stepson, and Bertie, seeing the error of his ways, apologized humbly. His apologies were eventually accepted, and when he had intimated to her ladyship that she should be introduced to all his swell friends in England, it was settled that he should make one of the party in the car, his valet travelling by train. As this arrangement completed itself, Mr. Bertie suddenly remembered my presence and flashed me a look of triumph. I, listening silently, had been rejoicing in the development of the situation as far as I was concerned, for the sooner we got away from the chateau, the less likely was Monsieur Chartier to succeed in catching us up. But when I heard that we were to have Bertie with us, my heart sank, especially as his look told me that I counted for something in his plan. The chauffeur accounted for something too, I feared. In any case, the rest of the tour was spoiled, and if it hadn't been for the thought that when it was over, Jack and I might meet no more, I should have wished it cut short. Goodbyes were perfunctory in the morning, and nobody seemed heartbroken at parting from the Turnour family. The big luggage, packed early in the haste, was sent on to Paris, and when the chauffeur had disposed of Bertie's additions to the Eaglesload, hostilities began. "Put down that seat for me," said Mr. Stokes to Mr. Dane, indicating one of the folding chairs in the glass cage, and carefully waiting to do so until I was within eye and earshot. They glared at each other like two tigers for an instant, and then Jack put the seat down. I knew why. A refusal on his part to do such a service for his master's stepson would mean that he must resign or be discharged, and leave me to deal unaided with a cad. I think Bertie knew, too, why he was unhesitatingly obeyed, and racked his brain for further tests. It was not long before he had a brilliant idea. The car stopped at a level crossing to let a train go by, and Bertie availed himself of the opportunity to get out. "Sir Samuel's going to let me try my hand at drivin'," said he. "I don't think much of your form, and I've been tellin' him so. My best pal is a director of the Aigle Company, and I've driven his car a lot of times. Her ladyship will let Elise sit inside, and I'll watch her style a bit before I take the wheel." "Not a word," said Jack. He didn't even look at me as he helped me down from the seat, which had been mine for so many happy days. I crept miserably into the stuffy glass cage, where, in the folding chair, I sat as far forward as my own shape and the cars allowed. Sir Samuel's fat knees in my back, Lady Turnour's sharp voice in my ears. And for scenery, I had Bertie's aggressive shoulders and supercilious gesticulations. The road to Nevers I scarcely saw. I think it was flat, but Bertie's driving made it play cup and ball with the car in a curious way, which a good chauffeur could hardly have managed if he tried. We passed Riom, Ganat, Aigues-Perces, I know, and at Moulins, in the valley of the Aie, we lunched in a hurry. To Nevers we came early, but it was there we were to stop for the night, and there we did stop, in a drizzle of rain which prevented sightseeing for those who had the wish, and the freedom, to go about. As for me, I was ordered by Lady Turnour to mend Mr. Stokes's socks, he having made peace by offering to give her a swagger dinner in town. Bertie's cleverness was not confined to ingratiating himself with her ladyship. He contrived adroitly to damage the steering gear by grazing a wall as he turned the Aigle into the hotel courtyard, and by this feat disposed of the chauffeur's evening, which was spent in hard work at the garage. Such dinner as Jack got, he ate there, in the shape of a furtive sandwich or two, otherwise we should not have been able to leave in the morning at the early hour suggested by Mr. Stokes. Warned by the incidents of yesterday, Sir Samuel desired his chauffeur to take the wheel again from Nevers to Paris. But, no doubt with a view of keeping us apart and devising new tortures for his enemy, Bertie elected to play wolf to Jack's Spartan boy and sit beside him. This relegated me to the cage again, with back massage from Sir Samuel's knees. Before Fontainebleau, I found myself in a familiar land. As far as Montargis, I had motored with the Milvains more than once, conducted by Monsieur Chartier, in a great car which might have been mine if I had accepted it, not with a pound of tea, but with 200 pounds of millionaire. I knew the lovely valley of the Loing, and the forest which makes the world green and shadowy from Bourreau to Fontainebleau, a world where poetry and history clasp hands. I should have had plenty to say about it all to Jack, if we had been together, but I was still inside the car, and by this time Bertie had induced his stepfather to consent to his driving again. He pleaded that there had been something wrong with the ignition yesterday. That was why the car had not gone well. It had not been his fault at all. Sir Samuel, always inclined to say yes rather than no to what he loved, said yes to Bertie, and had cause to regret it. Close to Fontainebleau, Mr. Stokes saw another car with a pretty girl in it. The car was going faster than ours, as it was higher powered and had a lighter load. Naturally, being himself, it occurred to Bertie that it would be well to show the pretty girl what he could do. We were going uphill, as it happened, and he changed speed with a quick, fierce crash. The Aigle made a sound as if she were gritting her teeth, shivered, and began to run back. Bertie, losing his head, tried a lower speed, which had no effect, and Lady Turnour had begun to shriek when Jack leaned across and put on the handbrake. The car stopped, just in time not to run down a pony cart full of children. No wonder the poor Aigle had gritted her teeth. Several of them turned out to be broken in the gearbox. "We're done," said Jack. "Shall have to be towed to the nearest garage. Pity we couldn't have got on to Paris." "Can't you put in some false teeth?" suggested Lady Turnour, at which Bertie laughed, and was thereupon reproached for the accident, as he well deserved to be. Then the question was, what should be the next step for the passengers? I expected to be trotted reluctantly on to Paris by train, leaving Jack behind to find a tow and see the dilemma through to an end of some sort, but to my joyful surprise, Bertie used all his wiles upon the family to induce them to stop at Fontainebleau. It was a beautiful place, he argued, and they would like it so much that they would come to think the breakdown a blessing in disguise. In any case, he had intended advising them to pause for tea and to stay the night if they cared for the place. They would find a good hotel, practically in the forest, and he had an acquaintance who owned a chateau near by, a very important sort of chap, who knew everybody worth knowing in French society. If the governor and Lady T liked, he would go dig his friend up and bring him round to call. Maybe they'd all be invited to the chateau for dinner. The man had a lot of motors and would send one for them very likely, perhaps would even lend a car to take them on to Paris tomorrow morning. I listened to these arguments and suggestions with a creepy feeling in the roots of my hair, for I, too, have an acquaintance who owns a chateau near Fontainebleau, a certain Monsieur Chartier. He also has a lot of motors, and would, I knew, if he were in residence, be delighted to lend a car and extend an invitation to dinner, if informed that Lise d'Angely was of the party. Could it be, I thought, that Mr. Stokes was acquainted with Monsieur Chartier, or that, not being acquainted, he had heard something from the Duchess de Milan, and was making a little experiment with me? Perhaps I imagined it, but it seemed that he glanced my way triumphantly when Lady Turnour agreed to stay, in the hopes of meeting the nameless but important friend, and I felt that, whatever happened, I must have a word of advice from Jack. The discussion had taken place in the road, or rather at the side of the road, where the combined exertions of Jack and Bertie had pushed the wounded eagle. The chauffeur, having examined the car and pronounced her helpless, walked back to interview a carter we had passed not long before, with a view of procuring a tow. Now, just as the discussion was decided in favor of stopping overnight at Fontainebleau, he appeared again in the cart. We were so near the hotel in the woods that we could be towed there in half an hour, and, ignominious as the situation was, Lady Turnour preferred it to the greater evil of walking. I remained in the car with her, the chauffeur steered, the carter towed, and Sir Samuel and his stepson started on in advance on foot. At the hotel Jack was to leave us, and be towed to a garage, but, in desperation, I murmured an appeal as he gave me an armful of rugs. "I must ask you about something," I whispered. "Can you come back in a little less than an hour, and look for me in the woods, somewhere just out of sight of the hotel?" "Yes," he said, "I can and will. You may depend on me." That was all, but I was comforted, and the rugs became suddenly light. Rooms were secured, great stress being laid upon a good sitting room, in case the important friend should call, and I unpacked as usual. When my work was done, I asked her ladyship's permission to go out for a little while. She looked suspicious, clawed her brains for an excuse to refuse, but, as there wasn't a buttonless glove or a holey stocking among the party, she reluctantly gave me leave. I darted away, plunged into the forest, and did not stop walking until I had got well out of sight of the hotel. Then I sat down on a mossy log under a great tree, and looked about for Jack. A man was coming. I jumped up eagerly, and went to meet him as he appeared among the trees. It was Mr. Herbert Stokes. End of chapter 29, read by Nancy Cochran Gorgen, Gilbert, Arizona, March 30, 2025. Chapter 30 of The Motor Maid. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Motor Maid by Charles Norris Williamson and Alice Muriel Williamson. Chapter 30. "I followed you," he said. "I thought so," said I. "It was like you." "I want to talk to you," he explained. "But I don't want to talk to you," I objected. "You'll be sorry if you're rude. What I came to say is for your own good." "I doubt that," said I, looking anxiously down one avenue of trees after another for a figure that would have been doubly welcome now. "Well, I can easily prove it if you'll listen." "As you have longer legs than I have, I am obliged to listen." "You won't regret it. Now, come, my dear little girl. Don't put on any more frills with me. I'm getting a bit fed up with 'em." I should have liked to choke him with a whole mouthful of frills, the paper kind you put on ham at Christmas, but as I had none handy, I thought it would only lead to undignified controversy to allude to them. "I had a little conversation about you with the Duchess de Milan night before last," Bertie went on, with evident relish. "Ah, I thought that would make you blush. I say, you're prettier than ever when you do that. It was she began it. She asked me if I knew your name, and how Lady T found you. Her ladyship couldn't get any further than Elise, for, if she knew any more, she'd forgotten it. But thanks to your friend, the chauffeur, I could go one better. When I told the Duchess you called yourself D'Angeli, or something like that, she said, I was sure of it. Now I expect you begin to smell a rat. What? I dare say you've been carrying one about in your pocket ever since, I snapped, though I can't think what it has to do with me. I'm not interested in dead rats. This is your own rat, said Bertie, grinning. What'll you give to know what the Duchess told me about you? Nothing, I said. Well, then I'll be generous and let you have it for nothing. She told me she thought she recognized you, but until she heard the name, she supposed she must be mistaken, that it was only a remarkable resemblance between my stepmother's maid and a girl who'd run away under very peculiar circumstances from the house of a friend of hers. What do you think of that? That the Duchess is a cat, I replied promptly. Most women are. In your set, perhaps. She said there was a man mixed up with the story, a rich, middle-aged chap of the name of Chartier, with a big house in Paris and a new chateau he built near Fontainebleau. She gave me a card to him. He's sure not to be at home, I remarked. Bertie's face fell, but he brightened again. Anyhow, you admit you know him. One has all sorts of acquaintances, I drawled with a shrug of my shoulders. You're a sly little kitten, if you're not a cat. You heard me say I thought of calling at the chateau. And you heard me say the owner wasn't at home. You seem well acquainted with his movements. I happened to see him on his way south at Avignon some days ago. Did he see you? Isn't that my affair and his? By Jove, you've got good cheek to talk like that to your mistress's stepson. But maybe you think you won't have difficulty in finding a place that pays you better. What? I couldn't find one to pay me much worse. Look here, my dear, I'm not out hunting for repartee. I want to have an understanding with you. I don't see why. Yes, you do, well enough. You know I like you, in spite of your impudence. And I dislike you because of yours. Oh, do go away and leave me, Mr. Stokes. I won't. I've got a lot to say to you. I've only just begun, but you keep interrupting me, and I can't get ahead. Finish, then. Well, what I want to say is this. I always meant we should stop at Fontainebleau. Oh, you damaged your stepfather's car on purpose. He would be obliged to you. Not quite that. I intended to get them to have tea here, and while they were mooning about, I was going to have a chat with you. I was going to tell you about that car to Chartier, and something else. That the Duchess asked me where we would stop in Paris, and I told her at the best there is, of course, Hotel Athénée. She said she'd wire her friends you'd run away from, that they could find you there, and if Chartier wasn't at Fontainebleau when we passed through, these people would certainly know where to get at him. I warned you the other night, didn't I? That if you wouldn't be good and confide in me, I'd find out what you refused to tell me yourself. And I have, you see. Clever, aren't I? You're the hatefulest man I ever heard of, I flung at him. Oh, I say, don't speak too soon. You don't know all yet. If you don't want me to, I won't call on Chartier. Lady T and her tuft hunting can go hang. And you shan't stop at the Athénée to be caught by the Duchess's friends, if you don't like it. That's what I wanted to see you about. To tell you it all depends on yourself. How does it depend on myself? I asked cautiously. All you have to do, to get off scot-free, is to be a little kind to poor Bertie. You can begin by giving him a kiss, here in the Poetic, and what you may call a forest of Fontainebleau. I wouldn't kiss you if you were made of gold and diamonds, and I could have you melted down to spin, I exclaimed. And as I delivered this ultimatum, I turned to run. His legs might be longer than mine, but I weighed about 1/3 as much as he, which was in my favor if I chose to throw dignity to the winds. As I whisked away from him, he caught me by the dress, and I heard the gathers rip. I had to stop. I couldn't arrive at the hotel without a skirt. You're a cad! A cad! I stammered. And you're a fool. Look here, I can lose you your job and have you sent to the prison where naughty girls go. See what I've got in my pocket." Still grasping my frock, he scooped something out of an inner pocket of his coat and held it for me to look at in the hollow of his palm. I gave a little cry. It was Lady Turnour's gorgeous bursting sun. "I nicked that off the dressing table the other night when you weren't looking. Has Lady T been asking for it?" "No," I answered, speaking more to myself than to him. She's had too much to think of. She didn't count her things that night, and at Nevers she didn't open the bag." "So much the worse for you, my pet, when she does find out. She left her jewels in your charge. When I came into the room, they were all lying about on the dressing table, and you were playing with them." "I was putting them back into her bag." "So you say. Jolly careless of you not to know you hadn't put this thing back. It's about the best of the lot she hadn't got plastered on her for the servants' ball." "It was careless," I admitted, "but it was your fault. You came in and were so horrid, and upset me so much, that I forgot what I'd put into the bag already, and what I hadn't. Lady T doesn't know I went back to her room." "I'll tell her!" I cried. "I'll bet you'll tell her right enough. But I can tell a different story. I'll say I didn't go near the room. My story will be that I was walking through the woods this afternoon on my way to Chartier's chateau when I saw you with the thing in your hands looking at it. Probably going to ask the Shuvert to dispose of it for you. What? And share profits." "Oh, you coward!" I exclaimed, and snatched the diamond brooch from him. Instantly he let go my dress, laughing. "That's right. That's what I wanted," he said. "Now you've got it, and you can keep it. I'll tell Lady T where to look for it, unless you'll change your mind and give me that kiss." I was so angry, so stricken with horror, and a kind of nightmare fear which I had not time to analyze, that I stood silent, trembling all over, with the brooch in my hand. How silly I had been to play his game for him, just like the poor stupid cat who pulled the hot chestnut out of the fire. I don't think any chestnut could ever have been as hot as that bursting sun. I wanted to drop it on the grass or throw it as far as I could see it, but dared not, because it would be my fault that it was lost, and Lady Turnour would believe Bertie's story all the more readily. She would think he had seen me with the jewel, and that I'd hidden it because I was afraid of what he might do. "To kiss or not to kiss? That's the question," laughed Bertie. "Is it?" said Jack, and Jack's hand, inside of Mr. Stokes's beautiful tall collar, shook Bertie back and forth till his teeth chattered like castanets, and his good-looking pink face grew more and more like a large boiled beetroot. I had seen Jack coming, long enough to have counted 10 before he came, but I didn't count 10. I just let him come. Bertie could not speak. He could only gurgle. And if I had been a Roman lady in the amphitheatre of Nims, or somewhere, I'm afraid I should have wanted to turn my thumb down. "What was the beast threatening you with?" Jack wanted to know. "The beast was threatening to make Lady Turnour think I'd stolen this brooch, which he'd taken himself," I panted, through the beatings of my heart. "If you didn't kiss him?" "Yes, and he was going to do lots of other horrid things too. Tell Monsieur Chartier, and let my cousins come and find me at the Hotel Athénée in Paris, and—" "He won't do any of them, but there are several things I'm going to do to him. Go away, my child. Run off to the house as quick as you can." I gasped. "What are you going to do to him?" "Don't worry. I shan't hurt him nearly as much as he deserves. I'm only going to do what the head must have neglected to do to him at school." Bertie had come out into the woods with a neat little stick, which, during part of our conversation, he had tucked jauntily under his arm. It now lay on the ground. I saw Jack glance at it. "Ah," I faltered, Do you think you'd better?" I know I had. "Go, child." I went. I had great faith in Jack, faith that he knew what was best for everyone. End of chapter 30, read by Nancy Cochran Gorgen, Gilbert, Arizona, January 5, 2025. January 5, 2025. Chapter 31 of The Motor Maid. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Motor Maid by Charles Norris Williamson and Alice Muriel Williamson. Chapter 31. Unfortunately, I forgot to ask for instructions as to how I should behave when I came to the hotel, and I had the bursting sun still in my hand. I thought things over as well as I could with a pounding pulse for every square inch of my body. If I were a rabbit, I could scurry into my hole and lay low while other people fought out their destiny and arranged mine. But being a girl, tingling with my share of American pluck, and blazing with French fire, rabbits seemed to me, at the instant, only worthy of being made into pie. Bertie, at this moment, was being made into pie, humble pie, and I don't doubt that the chauffeur, whom he had consistently tortured, because of me, would make him eat a large slice of himself when the humble pie was finished, also because of me. And because it was because of me, I knocked at the Turnour's sitting-room door with a bold, brave knock, as if I thought myself their social equal. They had had their tea, and were sitting about, looking graceful, in the expectation of seeing Bertie and his French friend. It was a disappointment to her ladyship to see only me, and she showed it with a frown, but Sir Samuel looked up kindly, as usual. I laid the bursting sun on the table, and told them everything, very fast, without pausing to take a breath, so that they wouldn't have time to stop me. But I didn't begin with the bursting sun, or even with the beating that Bertie was enjoying in the woods. I began with the Princess Borokoff and Lady Kilmarny, and I addressed Sir Samuel from beginning to end. Somehow I felt I had his sympathy even when I rushed at the most embarrassing part, which concerned his stepson and the necktie. Just as I had told about the brooch, and Bertie's threat, and was coming to his punishment, another knock at the door produced the two young men, both pale, but Jack with a noble pallor, while Bertie's was the sick paleness of pain and shame. "I've brought him to apologize to Miss D'Angeli in your presence, Sir Samuel, and Lady Turnour's," said the chauffeur. "I see you know something of the story." "They know all now," said I, for Bertie's face proved the truth of my words, if they had needed proof. His eyes were swimming in tears, and he looked like a whipped schoolboy. But suddenly a whim roused her ladyship to speak up in his defence, or at least to criticize the chauffeur for presuming to take her stepson's chastisement into his hands. "What right have you to set yourself up as Elise's champion, anyway?" she demanded, shrilly. "Have you and she been getting engaged to each other behind our backs?" "It would be my highest happiness to be engaged to Miss D'Angeli, if she would marry me," said Jack, with such a splendidly sincere ring in his voice that I could almost have believed him if I hadn't known he was in love with another woman. "But I am no match for her. It's only as her friend that I have acted in her defence, as any decent man has a right to act when a lady is insulted." Then Bertie apologized, in a dull voice, with his eyes on the ground, and mumbled a kind of confession, mixed with self-justification. He had pocketed the brooch, yes, meaning to play a trick, but had intended no harm, only a little fun. Pretty girl. Ladies' maids didn't usually mind a bit of flirtation, and a present or two. How was he to know this one was different? Sorry if he had caused annoyance, could say no more, and so on, until I stopped him, having heard enough. Poor Sir Samuel was crestfallen, but not too utterly crushed to reproach his bride with unwonted sharpness, when she would have scolded me for carelessness in not putting the brooch away. "Let the girl alone," he grumbled. "She's a very good girl, and has behaved well. I wish I could say the same of others nearer to me." "Of course, Sir Samuel, after what's happened, You wouldn't want me to stay in your employ any more than I would want to stay," said Jack. "Unfortunately, the Aigle will be hung up 2 or 3 days till new pinions can be fitted in at the garage. I can send them out from Paris if you like, but no doubt you'll prefer to have my engagement with you to come to an end today. Mr. Stokes has driven the car and can again." "Not if I have anything to say about it," murmured her ladyship. "Scattering the poor thing's teeth all over the place." "There are plenty of good chauffeurs to be got at short notice in Paris," Jack suggested, "and you are certain to find one by the time you are ready to start." "You're right, Dane. We'll have to part company," said Sir Samuel. "As for Elise here—" "She'll have to go too," broke in her ladyship. "It's most inconvenient, and all your stepson's fault, though she's far from blameless in my humble opinion, whatever yours may be. Don't tell me that a young man will go about flirting with ladies' maids unless they encourage him." "I shall leave, of course, immediately," said I, my ears tingling. "Who wants you to do anything else? Though nobody cares for my convenience, I can always go to the wall. But thank heaven there are maids in Paris as well as chauffeurs. And talking of that combination, my advice to you is, if Dane's willing to have you, don't turn up your nose at him, but marry him as quickly as you can. I suppose, even in your class of life, there's such thing as gossip." I was scarlet. Somehow I got out of the room, and while I was scurrying my few belongings into my dressing bag, and spreading out the red satin frock to leave as a legacy to Lady Turnour, in any case, nothing could have induced me to wear it again. Sir Samuel sent me up an envelope containing a month's wages, and something over. I enclosed the something over in another envelope with a grateful line of refusal, and sent it back. Thus ends my experience as a motor maid. What was going to become of me I didn't know, but while I was jamming in hatpins and praying for ideas, there came a knock at the door. A penciled note from the late chauffeur, signed hastily, "Yours ever, J.D.," and inviting me down to the courier's dining room for conference. There would be no one there but ourselves at this hour, he said, and we should be able to talk over our plans in peace. What a place to say farewell forever to the only men I ever had, could or would love, a courier's dining room with grease spots on the tablecloth. However, there was no help for it, since I was facing the world with 50 francs, and could not afford to pay for a romantic background. After all that had happened, and especially after certain impertinent references made to our private affairs, I felt a new and very embarrassing shyness in meeting the man with whom I'd been playing that pleasant little game called brother and sister. He was waiting for me in the courier's room, which was even dingier and had more grease spots than I had fancied, and I hurried into speech to cover my nervousness. "I don't know how I'm going to thank you for all you've done for me," I stammered. "That horrible Bertie—" "Let's not talk of him," said Jack. "Put him out of your mind forever. He has no place there, or in your life, and no more have any of the incidents that led up to him. You've had a very bad time of it, poor little girl, and now—" "Oh, I haven't!" I exclaimed. "I've been happier than ever before in my life. That is, it was all so novel and like a play." "Well, now the play's over," Jack broke in, pitying my evident embarrassment. "I wanted to ask you if you'd let me advise and perhaps help you. We have been brother and sister, you know. Nothing can take that away from us." "No," said I, in a queer little voice. "Nothing can." "You want to go to England, I know," he went on. "And, if you'll forgive my taking liberties, you haven't much money at hand, you've almost told me. I suppose you haven't changed your mind about your relations in Paris? You wouldn't like to go back to them or write and tell them firmly that you won't marry the person they seem to have set their hearts on for you? That you've made your own choice and intend to abide by it, but that if they'll be sensible and receive you, you're willing to stop with them until the men in England—" "What men in England?" I cut him short, in utter bewilderment. "Well, You didn't tell me his name, of course, but that rich chap you expected to meet when you got over to England. Don't you think it would be better if he came to you at your cousin's? If they—" "There isn't any rich chap," I exclaimed. "I don't know what you mean." "Oh, yes, I do too. I did speak about someone who was very rich, and would be kind to me. I rather think—I remember now. I guessed you'd imagine it was a man, but that seemed the greatest joke, so I didn't try to undeceive you. Fancy your believing that, all this time, though, and thinking about it." "I thought of it on an average once every 3 minutes," said Jack. "You're chaffing now, of course. Why, the person I hoped might be kind to me in England is an old lady. Oh, but such a funny old lady, who wanted me to be her companion, and said, no matter when I came, if it were years from now, I must let her know, for she would like to have me with her to help chase away a dragon of a maid she's afraid of. I met her only once, in the train the night before I arrived at Cannes, but she and I got to be the greatest friends, and her bulldog, Beau—" "Her bulldog, Beau?" "A perfect lamb, though he looks like a cross between a crocodile and a gnome. The old lady's name is Miss Paget." "My aunt!" I stared at Jack, not knowing how to take this exclamation. The few Englishmen I met when Mamma and I were together, or when I lived with the Milvains, were rather fond of using that ejaculation when it was apparently quite irrelevant. If you told a youthful Englishman that you were not allowed to walk or bicycle alone in the Bois, he was as likely as not to say, "My aunt!" In fact, whatever surprised him was apt to elicit this cry. I have known several young men who gave vent to it at intervals of from half to 3/4 of an hour, but I had never before heard Jack make the exclamation, so when I had looked at him, and he had looked at me in an emotional kind of silence for a few seconds, I asked him, "Why, my aunt?" "Because she is my aunt." "Surely not my Miss Paget." "I should think it highly improbable that your Miss Paget and my Miss Paget could be the same, if you hadn't mentioned her bulldog, Beau. There can't be a quantity of Miss Pagets going about the world with bulldogs named Beau. Only my Miss Paget never does go about the world. She hates traveling." "So does mine. She said that being in a train was no pursuit for a gentlewoman." "That sounds like her. She's quite mad." "She seemed very kind." "I'm glad she did to you. She has seemed rather the contrary to me." "Oh, what did she do to you?" "Did her best to spoil my life, that's all, with the best intentions, no doubt. Still, by Jove, I thank her. If it hadn't been for my aunt, I should never have seen my sister." "Thank you. You're always kind and polite. Do you mean it was because of her you took to what you call shuving?" "Exactly." "But I thought—" "What?" "I don't dare tell you." "I should think you might know by this time that you can tell me anything. You must tell me." "I thought it was a beautiful lady who was with you the first time you saw the battlement garden at Beauclair, who ruined your life." "Beautiful lady? Battlement garden? Good heavens, what extraordinary things we seem to have been thinking about each other. I with my man in England, you with your beautiful lady." "She's a different thing. You talked to me about her," I insisted. "Surely you must remember." "I remember the conversation perfectly. I didn't explain my meaning, as the professor demonstrates a rule in higher mathematics, but I thought you couldn't help understanding well enough, especially a vain little thing like you." "I? Vain? Oh! You are, aren't you?" Well, I'm afraid I am, a little." "You could never have looked in the glass if you weren't. Didn't you see, or guess, that I was talking about an ideal whom I had conjured into being as a desirable companion in that garden? I can't understand from the way the conversation ran how you could have helped it. When I first went to the battlement garden, I was several years younger, steeped with the spirit of Provence and full of thoughts of Nicolette. I was just sentimental enough to imagine that such a girl as Nicolette was with me there, and always afterward I associated the vision of the ideal with that garden. I said to myself that I should like to come there again with that ideal in the flesh. And then I did come again. With you. But you said you thought of her always, that because you couldn't have her, or something of the sort. Well, all that was no surprise to you, was it? You must have known perfectly well, ever since that night at Avignon, when you let your hair down, anyhow, if not before, that I was trying desperately hard not to be an idiot about you, and not exactly radiant with joy in the thought that whoever the man was who would get you, it couldn't be I? Oh, I breathed a long, heavenly breath that seemed to let all the sorrows and worries pour out of my heart as the air rushed out of my lungs. Oh, you can't mean, truly and really, that you're in love with me, can you? Surely it isn't news to you. I should think it was, I exclaimed rapturously. Oh, I'm so happy. Another scalp, though a humble one? Don't be a beast. I'm so horribly in love with you, you know, it's been hurting so dreadfully. Then I rather think he said, my darling, but I'm not quite sure, for I was so busy falling into his arms, and he was holding me so very, very tightly. We stayed like that for a long time, not saying anything and not even thinking, but feeling. And the courier's dining room was a princess's boudoir in an enchanted palace. The grease spots were stars and moons that had rolled out of heaven to see how two poor mortals looked when they were perfectly happy. Just a poor chauffeur and a motor maid, but the world was theirs. End of chapter 31, read by Nancy Cochran Gorgen, Gilbert, Arizona, December 23, 2024. Chapter 32 of The Motor Maid. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Motor Maid by Charles Norris Williamson and Alice Muriel Williamson. Chapter 32. After a while we talked again and explained all the cross purposes to each other, with the most interesting pauses in between the explanations, and Jack told me about himself and Miss Paget. It seems that her only sister was his mother, and she had been in love with his father before he met the sister. The father's name was Claude, and Jack was named after him. It was Miss Paget's favorite name, because of the man she had loved. But the first Claude wasn't very lucky. He lost all his own money, and most of his wife's, and died in South America, where he'd gone in the hope of making more. Then the wife, Jack's mother, died too, while he was at Eton. After that, Miss Paget's house was his home. Whenever he was extravagant at Oxford, as he was sometimes, she would pay his debts quite happily, and tell him that everything she had would be his some day, so he was not to bother about money. Accordingly, he didn't bother, but lived rather a lazy life, so he said, and enjoyed himself. A couple of years before I met him, he got interested, through a friend, in a newly invented motor, which they both thought would be a wonderful success. Jack tried to get his aunt interested too, but she didn't like the friend who had invented it, seemed jealous of Jack's affection for him, and refused to have anything to do with the affair. Jack had gone so far, however, while taking her consent for granted, that he felt bound to go on, and when Miss Paget would have nothing to do with floating the new invention, Jack sold out the investments of his own little fortune, all that was left of his mother's money, putting everything at his friend's disposal. Miss Paget was disgusted with him for doing this, and when the motor wouldn't mote, and the invention wouldn't float, she just said, "I told you so." It was at this time, Jack went on to tell me, that Miss Paget bought Beau. She had had another dog, given her by Jack, which died, and she collected Beau herself. Only a few days after Beau's arrival, Jack went down into the country to see his aunt and talk things over, for she had brought him up to expect to be her heir, and as she wanted him with her continually, as if he had been her son, she had objected to his taking up any profession. Now that he'd lost his own money in this unfortunate speculation, he felt he ought to do something not to be dependent upon her, his income of $200 a year having been sunk with the unfloatable motor invention. He meant to ask Miss Paget to lend him enough to go in as partner with another friend, who had a very thriving motor business, and to suggest paying her back so much a year. But everything was against him on that visit to his aunt's country house. In the first place, she was in a very bad humor with him because he had gone against her wishes, and she didn't want to hear anything more about motors or motor business. Then there was Beau, as a tertium quid. Beau had been bought from a dreadful man who had probably stolen and certainly ill-treated him. The dog was very young, and owing to his late owner's cruelty, feared and hated the sight of a man. Since she had had him, Miss Paget had done her very best to spoil the poor animal, encouraging him to growl at the men servants, and laughing when he frightened away any male creature who had come about the place. While she and Jack were arguing over money and motors, who should stroll in but Beau, who, at sight of a stranger, a man, closeted with his indulgent mistress, flew into a rage. He seized Jack by the trouser leg and began to worry it, and Jack had to choke him before the dog would let go his grip. The sight of this dreadful deed threw Miss Paget into hysterics. She shrieked that her nephew was cruel, ungrateful, that he had never loved her, that he cared only for her money, and now that he grudged her the affection of a dog with which he had had nothing to do, that the dog's dislike for him was a warning to her, and made her see him in his true light at last. "Go! Go! Out of my sight, or I'll set my poor darling at you!" she cried, and Jack went, after saying several rather frank things. At heart he was fond of his aunt, in spite of her eccentricities, and believed that she was of him. Therefore he expected a letter of apology for her injustice, and a request to come back. But no such letter ever arrived. Perhaps Miss Paget thought it was his place to apologize, and was waiting for him to do so. In any case, they had never seen each other again, and after a few weeks Jack received a formal note from his aunt's solicitor, saying that, as she realized now he had no real affection for her or hers, he need look for no future advantages from her, but was at liberty to take up any line of business he chose. Miss Paget would no longer attempt to interfere with his wishes or direct his affairs. This must have been a pleasant letter for a penniless young man, just robbed of all his future prospects. His own money gone, and no hope of any to put into a profession or business. Jack lived as he could for some months, trying for all sorts of positions, making a few guineas by sketches and motoring articles for newspapers, and somehow contriving to keep out of debt. He went to France to write up a great automobile race as a special commission, but the paper which had given the commission, a new one devoted to the interests of motoring, suddenly failed. Jack found himself stranded, advertised for a position as chauffeur, and got it. There was a history which he hadn't inflicted on me before, lest I should be bored. He was interested to hear of Miss Paget's journey to Italy, and knew all about the cousin who had died, leaving her money which she didn't need, and a castle in Italy which she didn't want. He laughed when I told him how the redoubtable Simpkins refused to trust herself upon that great nasty wet thing, which was the Channel, but nothing could hold his attention firmly, except our affairs. For his affairs and my affairs were not separate any longer. They were joined together for weal or woe. Whatever happened, however imprudent the step might be, he decided that we must be married. We loved each other, each was the other's world, and nothing must part us. Besides, said Jack, I needed a protector. I had no home, and he could not have me persecuted by creatures who produced corn plasters. His idea was to take me to England at once and have me there promptly made Mrs. John Dane by special license. He had a few pounds, and a few things which he could sell would bring in a few more. Then, with me for an incentive, he should get something to do that was worth doing. I said yes to everything, and Jack darted away to converse with a nice man he had met in the garage who had a motor and was going to Paris almost immediately. If he had not gone yet, perhaps he would take us. Luckily, he had not gone, and he did take us. He took us to the Gare du Nord, where we would just have time to eat something and catch the boat train to Calais. We should be in London in the morning, and Jack would apply for a special license as early as possible. I stood guarding our humble heap of luggage, while Jack spent his hard-earned sovereigns for our tickets, when suddenly I heard a voice which sounded vaguely familiar. It was broken with distress and excitement. Still, I felt sure I had heard it before, and turned quickly, exclaiming, "Miss Paget!" There she was, with a dressing bag in one hand and a broken dog-leash in the other. Tears were running down her fat face, not so fat as it had been, under spectacles, and her false front was put on anyhow. "Oh, my dear girl!" she wailed, without showing the slightest sign of astonishment at sight of me. "What a mercy you've turned up! But it's just like you. Have you seen my beau anywhere?" "No," I said, rather stiffly, for I couldn't forgive her or her dog for their treatment of my Jack. "Oh, dear! What shall I do?" she exclaimed. "He hates railway stations. You can't think the awful time we've had since you left me in the train at Cannes. And now he's broken his leash and run away, and I can't speak any French except to ask for hot water in Italian, and I don't see how I'm going to find my darling again. They'll snatch him up, to fling him into some terrible murderous wagon, and take him to a lethal home, or whatever they call it. For heaven's sake, go and ask everybody where he is. And if you find him, you can have anything on earth I've got, especially my Italian castle, which I can't sell. You can come to England with me and Beau, when you've got him, and I'll make you happy all the rest of your life. Oh, go! Do go! I'll look after your luggage." "It's half your own nephew's, Jack Dane's, luggage," said I, breathless and pulsing. "I'm going to England with him, and he's going to make me happy all the rest of my life, for we mean to be married, in spite of your cruelty, which has made him poor, and turned him into a chauffeur. But here he comes now. And why, Miss Paget, there's Beau walking with him without any leash. Beau must remember him." "Beau with Jack Dane?" gasped the old lady. "Jack Dane's found Beau? Beau's forgiven him. Then so will I. You can both have the Italian castle, and everything that goes with it, and everything else that's mine, too, except Beau." "Hello, Aunt. Here's your dog," said Jack. Beau licked his foot. End of chapter 32. Read by Nancy Cochran Gorgen, Gilbert, Arizona, December 22, 2024. End of The Motor Maid by Charles Norris Williamson and Alice Muriel Williamson.